If you're ready to rest, you're in the right place. Close your eyes, relax your body, and drift into a slower time. We'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop a comment if you'd like to share. If diamonds are a girl's best friend, then the Hope Diamond is that friend who always seems to cause trouble at parties. This infamous blue gem has a reputation as dark as its colour, with tales of curses and misfortune trailing it like a particularly persistent ghost. But before we dive into its journey through the hands of European aristocrats, let's rewind to its roots in the bustling streets of 17th century India. Back then, India was the go-to place for diamonds. Think of it as the Costco of precious stones, but with way more elephants and significantly less parking. The Hope Diamond, originally weighing in at a whopping 112 carats, was plucked from the Kolo mine in the Golconda region. Talk about a heavy hitter. Now, here's where things start to get murky. Legend has it that this gem was pried from the eye of a statue of a Hindu goddess. Classic cursed artifact origin story, right? But hold on. Like most juicy tales, this might be more fiction than fact. No historical records confirm such a dramatic theft. It sounds like something straight out of a Bollywood blockbuster rather than a history book. Moving forward, the diamond found its way into the hands of French gem trader Jean-Baptiste Tavernier around 1666. Tavernier was like the Indiana Jones of his time, minus the whip and the fedora. He sold the diamond to King Louis XIV, who had it cut down to a more manageable 67 carats. Because, the Sun King had to be practical about his bling. Louis XIV, never one to shy away from a little opulence, dubbed it the blue diamond of the crown, and wore it as part of his ceremonial accessories. Now, you might think that this is where the curse kicks in with a vengeance, but the truth is less dramatic. The diamond's misadventures didn't really start until it left the juicy confines of Versailles. Fast forward to the French Revolution, and the royal bling was looted during the infamous jewel heist of 1792. Imagine the chaos, revolutionaries storming the royal storehouse, pockets bulging with stolen gems. In the ensuing chaos, the diamond vanished, only to resurface in London in 1812. Its new owner, a wealthy banker named Thomas Hope, gave the gem its current name. Hope thought he was buying a ticket to high society. Little did he know he was acquiring a rock with a reputation as sketchy as a used car salesman's promise. Now, let's take a moment to unravel the curse narrative. Over its storied history, the Hope Diamond has been blamed for everything from financial ruin to untimely deaths. But here's the kicker. Many of these stories were cooked up by jewelers and sellers eager to add a touch of mystique to the gem. Nothing sells like a good curse, right? It's marketing 101 throw in a dash of danger, and suddenly everyone wants to see the rock that supposedly caused a string of misfortunes. Take, for instance, Evelyn Walsh McLean, an American socialite who bought the diamond in 1911. She believed in the diamond's power to bring good luck. Despite the fact that her life was a series of tragic events, her son died in a car crash, her daughter overdosed, and her husband left her for another woman. But was the diamond really to blame, or was it simply a reflection of the turbulent times and personal choices? You be the judge. Eventually, in 1958, the Hope Diamond found a more stable home at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., where it's been delighting, and possibly unnerving, visitors ever since. Today, it sits in the National Museum of Natural History, a 45-2 carat marvel that draws millions of visitors a year. Its journey through the ages is a testament to the allure of storytelling, the power of myth, and our eternal fascination with shiny things that glint in the dark. But let's not forget the harsh realities behind the sparkle. In the 17th century, diamond trading was a cutthroat business. Mines in India were operated under brutal conditions, with labourers toiling for mere scraps while traders like Tavernier raked in fortunes. It's a classic case of the rich getting richer, while the poor, well, they just got exhausted. These gems didn't arrive at European courts without a cost, and it wasn't just financial. So, what's the real curse of the Hope Diamond? Maybe it's a reflection of humanity's greed, ambition, and the lengths we'll go to for a piece of the extraordinary. Or perhaps the true curse is our willingness to believe in the fantastical, a glittering tale that's irresistible despite, or maybe because of, its lack of grounding in reality. In the end, the Hope Diamond is less about the misery it supposedly brings and more about the stories it continues to inspire. After all, who wouldn't be a little intrigued by a gem with a history as colourful as its hue? Speaking of glittering tales, let's dig into one of the 20th century's most captivating archaeological adventures, the unearthing of King Tutankhamun's tomb. It's a story that combines treasure hunting, ancient history, and a media circus that would make even the Kardashians envious. In 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter made a discovery that would ignite a global craze for all things Egyptian and give birth to the notorious Curse of the Pharaohs. Picture the scene, the Valley of the Kings, November 4, 1922. Carter's team, funded by the wealthy Lord Carnarvon, stumbles upon a stairway leading to a sealed door. Cue the dramatic music, because this is the archaeological equivalent of finding a winning lottery ticket in your old jeans. For years, Carter had been scouring the desert sands for a tomb that many believed was a myth. Most archaeologists thought everything worth discovering had already been unearthed. But Carter, ever the stubborn optimist, stuck to his gut feeling and a few years of meticulous digging. When the team finally breached the tomb on November 26, what they found was, beyond their wildest dreams, a burial chamber packed with golden artifacts, jewelry, and the now iconic death mask of King Tut. This wasn't just any treasure. It was a time capsule from a civilization that had been the envy of the ancient world. King Tut, the boy king who ruled for a mere decade in the 14th century BCE, had achieved in death what he couldn't in life, a rock star status that would echo through the ages. Now, let's talk about the so-called curse. The media at the time went into a frenzy, spinning tales of a deadly hex placed upon anyone who dared to disturb King Tut's eternal rest. The curse was supposedly responsible for a slew of mysterious deaths, including that of Lord Carnarvon, who died in Cairo just a few months after the tomb was opened. The cause? A mosquito bite that turned septic. Not exactly the stuff of ancient magic, but why let facts get in the way of a good story? The truth is, of the 58 people present at the tomb's opening, only 8 died within a dozen years. Statistically speaking, that's hardly a plague. But the allure of the curse was too tempting for newspapers to resist. Headlines screamed of Pharaoh's curse strikes again every time someone with a remote connection to the discovery caught a cold. It's the same logic that sells tabloid magazines today, sensationalism over substance. But why did people buy into the curse so readily? Well, the early 20th century was a time of great change and uncertainty. World War I had left a scar on the global psyche, and the world was hungry for distraction. Egypt, with its ancient mysteries and promise of untold riches, was the perfect escape. It was an era of Egyptomania, where even fashion and film were influenced by the allure of the Nile. The curse narrative added a tantalizing layer of danger to the romance, turning a historical discovery into a modern myth. Let's not forget the economic implications of this newfound Egyptomania. The discovery of King Tut's tomb was a boon for Egypt's tourism industry, drawing thousands of visitors eager to see the land of the pharaohs firsthand. Souvenir shops and travel agencies capitalized on the craze, selling everything from miniature sarcophagi to Nile cruise packages. It was a golden age of sorts for Egypt, albeit one built on the back of a boy king whose life was as brief as it was unremarkable, except for his tomb. Speaking of the boy king, let's address the reality behind his glittering burial. Tutankhamun ascended the throne at the tender age of 9 and died around 19, likely due to complications from malaria and a broken leg. Hardly the resume of a legendary ruler. His reign was marked by a return to traditional polytheism after his father Akhenaten's failed attempt at monotheism. In short, King Tut was more of a footnote in Egyptian history than a headline, until his tomb was discovered. The real significance of King Tut's tomb lies not in curses or boy kings, but in what it revealed about ancient Egyptian culture. Unlike other tombs that had been looted long ago, Tut's was remarkably intact, providing a treasure trove of information about burial practices, art, and daily life. Artifacts found within the tomb, like the golden chariots and finely crafted weaponry, offered insights into the wealth and craftsmanship of the New Kingdom era. In the end, the story of King Tut's tomb is as much about our fascination with the past as it is about the past itself. It's a tale of adventure, mystery, and the human tendency to find meaning and sometimes danger in the unknown. Whether you believe in the curse or not, there's no denying the impact it had on popular culture and the field of archaeology. So, the next time you see a King Tut costume at a Halloween party, remember that it's more than just a nod to ancient Egypt. It's a testament to the power of storytelling and our unending quest to connect with history. As we leave the desert sands of Egypt, let's keep our eyes peeled for the next twist in the tale of cursed artifacts. There's plenty more intrigue to uncover, including another legendary relic that promises its own brand of mystery and mayhem. Stay tuned because the past is never quite finished with us. From the sandy deserts of Egypt, let's leap across continents and unravel the dazzling yet tumultuous tale of the Koh-i-Noor diamond. If the Hope Diamond is the troublemaker at a party, the Koh-i-Noor is the guest who's constantly being passed around, yet somehow everyone wants to claim it as their own. This shiny rock has seen more thrones, betrayals, and political chess games than an entire season of Game of Thrones. And yes, there's a supposed curse in the mix, or at least a reputation for bringing down empires. Let's kick things off in the 13th century, smack in the middle of the chaotic and opulent Mughal Empire. The Koh-i-Noor, which translates to Mountain of Light in Persian, was first documented in 1526, but its earlier history remains as shadowy as a late-night poker game. This diamond, originally weighing around 793 carats, yeah, you heard that right, was part of the empire's treasure trove. The Mughals, with their flair for the dramatic, knew how to flaunt it. The diamond was set into the Peacock Throne, a masterpiece of Mughal architecture and design. Think of it as the ultimate blinged-out chair, dripping in gold and precious stones, a throne that would make even the Kardashians jealous. Its purpose? To dazzle, intimidate, and remind everyone who's boss. But hold on to your crowns, because things take a turn. Fast forward to 1739, when Persian ruler Nader Shah decided he fancied the Mughal treasures. After a bloody invasion, he waltzed into Delhi and left with the Peacock Throne and the Koh-i-Noor. Legend has it, upon seeing the diamond, he exclaimed, "Koh-i-Noor," thus giving it the name we know today. Nader Shah's victory was short-lived, reminiscent of a fireworks display. Brilliant, but fleeting. He was assassinated in 1747, and the diamond was passed around like a hot potato among various Persian rulers. Now, let's address the supposed curse. The diamond is said to bring bad luck to any man who wears it, which seems like a convenient excuse for all the backstabbing and political mess that surrounded it. After all, if you were a ruler in the 18th century, blaming your downfall on a cursed diamond is much more palatable than admitting you were outsmarted by a rival. It's like blaming your failed diet on the evil allure of chocolate cake. The curse narrative, while deliciously dramatic, conveniently glosses over the messy geopolitics of the time. By the mid-19th century, the Koh-i-Noor had made its way to India into the hands of the Sikh Empire. Enter Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the Lion of Punjab, who added the diamond to his collection. Singh, a man with a penchant for oversized jewellery and military expansion, was not about to let this gem go easily. But alas, the British Empire, ever the opportunistic magpie, had other plans. In 1849, as the British East India Company tightened its grip on the subcontinent, they pried the diamond away from Singh's successors. Picture the scene, a treaty, a 9-year-old Maharaja Dulip Singh, and a diamond changing hands under the watchful eyes of British officers. Cue the imperialistic theme music. The Koh-i-Noor was shipped off to Queen Victoria, whose reign was marked by an insatiable appetite for expanding the British Empire's reach and its jewellery collection. The diamond was presented to the Queen in a grand ceremony, a not-so-subtle symbol of British dominance over India. The British public, ever the fashion critics, found the original cut lacking in sparkle. So, in 1852, it was recut from its hefty 86 carats to a more modest 105.6 carats, sacrificing size for brilliance. A practical move, but one that also shaved off a bit of history. Today, the Koh-i-Noor sits in the Tower of London, part of the British Crown Jewels, and the debate over its rightful ownership is hotter than the surface of the sun. India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and even the Taliban have laid claim to the stone at various points, each citing historical grievances and cultural significance. The British stance? Well, it's complicated. While the diamond's acquisition is a classic tale of imperial conquest, returning it would open the floodgates for numerous restitution claims. It's like returning a borrowed book, only to be reminded of the entire library you've had for centuries. As for the curse, It's mostly a footnote in the diamond's storied past. Most modern royals seem to have sidestepped any supposed hex by ensuring it's only worn by women. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, wore it in her crown without any apparent misfortune, unless you count royal family drama as a curse. But let's face it, that's more a staple of royal life than an anomaly. The Koh-i-Noor story is a microcosm of colonial history, filled with power plays, cultural symbolism, and the age-old human fascination with shiny objects. It reflects our tendency to project myths onto history, romanticizing what was often a brutal reality. The diamond itself is just a rock, albeit an extraordinarily pretty one. Its true value lies in the narratives we attach to it, stories of emperors, conquerors, and empires that rose and fell under its glittering gaze. As we wrap up today's exploration of the Koh-i-Noor, remember that history is never just black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of perspectives, each vying for its version of the truth. The saga of this diamond is far from over, and who knows, maybe one day it will find its way back to one of its claimants. But for now, it remains locked away, a sparkling reminder of the tangled web of history and the stories we're so eager to tell. Stay tuned, because our next dive into the world of cursed artifacts will take us to another legendary relic with its own myths and mysteries. So, from the gobsmacking saga of the Koh-i-Noor, let's take a proverbial flight eastward to a tale that's equally shrouded in mystery and grandiosity: China's Terracotta Army. We're diving headfirst into the world of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, a man whose ambition was only rivaled by his paranoia. This is a story that involves thousands of life-sized clay soldiers, a quest for eternal life, and yes, a curse, or at least a rumor of one. First things first, picture this. It's the 3rd century BCE, and Qin Shi Huang has just unified China through a brutal campaign of conquest and consolidation. The guy was like the Steve Jobs of ancient China, always thinking big and not afraid to step on a few toes, or, more accurately, entire armies, to get his way. Under his rule, the Great Wall began its long journey of construction, currency was standardized, and the Chinese script was unified. But while he was busy shaping history, he was equally obsessed with the afterlife, a fixation that led to one of the most mind-boggling archaeological finds of the 20th century. Enter the Terracotta Army, a massive collection of over 8,000 soldiers, 130 chariots, and 670 horses, all crafted to protect the emperor in his eternal slumber. These figures were unearthed by unsuspecting farmers in 1974 in Xi'an, a discovery that catapulted them and their discovery site into global fame faster than you can say national treasure. Imagine digging in your backyard and stumbling upon an ancient army. Talk about a surprise. Suddenly, your garden gnome collection seems a little less impressive. Now let's address the elephant, or should I say, the terracotta horse, in the room, the curse. Rumor has it that those who dare to disturb the emperor's resting place are doomed to face misfortune. Why? Well, Qin Shi Huang wasn't exactly known for his chill demeanor. He was a ruler who reportedly ordered the burial of scholars alive and burned books that didn't align with his vision of state-controlled ideology. A guy like that might just be the type to place a curse on his eternal home for good measure. However, as much as we love a good spooky story to tell around the campfire, the curse narrative isn't quite as airtight as one of Qin's tomb seals. While some workers and archaeologists involved in the excavation reportedly suffered accidents and misfortunes, it's crucial to consider the context. The 1970s in China was a turbulent period politically and economically, hardly the best time for avoiding chaos. Plus, archaeological digs are inherently risky. It's not like unearthing an ancient army as a walk in the park. What stands out about the Terracotta Army isn't just the sheer size or the supposed curse, but the jaw-dropping craftsmanship and individuality of each statue. Yep, you heard that right. Each soldier has unique facial features, a testament to the artistry and labor that went into their creation. These weren't just mass-produced clay mannequins, they were handcrafted representations of real soldiers, reflecting the diverse makeup of the Qin military forces. It's like the ancient world's version of a high-stakes game of Guess Who. The construction of this subterranean army was a massive undertaking. It's estimated that over 700,000 laborers worked on the mausoleum complex over nearly 4 decades. If that sounds like an enormous workforce, it was. Comparable to the population of a small modern city, these workers were tasked with creating an underground empire, complete with palaces, rivers of mercury, and a ceiling encrusted with pearls to mimic the night sky. Talk about an afterlife worthy of an emperor. And let's not forget the economics of this grand project. In terms of sheer resources, the creation of the Terracotta Army was a monumental investment. The labour alone would have cost a fortune, not to mention the materials. The clay used for crafting the soldiers was sourced from local deposits, but the paint that once adorned them, now faded with time, was imported from afar, highlighting trade networks and the emperor's reach. It was an economic feat, reflective of an empire that had centralized power and resources like never before. But what drove this monumental endeavor? You guessed it, the emperor's obsession with immortality. Qin Shi Huang was so terrified of death that he reportedly sent out expeditions in search of the elixir of life. Spoiler alert, they returned empty-handed. So he decided to hedge his bets by building an afterlife that would make any deity jealous. The Terracotta Army was meant to protect him in the world beyond, a testament to his belief that his reign should continue indefinitely, even if he had to micromanage the afterlife. Now, let's pivot to the realities of ancient Chinese burial practices. While Qin Shi Huang's mausoleum is an extreme case, elaborate tombs were not uncommon among the elite. These burial sites reflected the deceased's earthly status, with goods, servants, and sometimes even living sacrifices intended to serve them in the next life. The ancient Chinese viewed the afterlife as an extension of the mortal world, and preparation for it was a serious affair. It was less about resting in peace and more about maintaining one's social standing indefinitely. As for the ultimate resting place of Qin Shi Huang himself, it remains tantalizingly undiscovered. The central tomb, said to be guarded by traps and filled with treasures, has yet to be excavated. Chinese officials have opted to preserve it for future generations, waiting until technology allows for a non-invasive exploration. Until then, the emperor's secrets remain buried, contributing to the aura of mystery that surrounds the site. In the end, the Terracotta Army is more than just a collection of clay soldiers. It's a window into the ambitions, fears, and culture of an ancient civilization. It tells a story of power, artistry, and the eternal human quest to cheat death. While the curse may be more myth than reality, it adds an irresistible layer of intrigue to a site already bursting with historical significance. As we wrap up this segment, remember that the Terracotta Army is just one chapter in the epic saga of Qin Shi Huang and his quest for immortality. There's more to unravel, more mysteries to explore, and more history to bring to life, so stay tuned. Our journey through the world of famous cursed artifacts is far from over, and who knows what other secrets the past might yet reveal. Leaving behind the clay legions of Qin Shi Huang, let's venture into the snow-capped peaks of the Italian Alps, where a very different kind of historical figure lay frozen in time for over 5,000 years, a guy we now call Ötzi, the Iceman. Discovered by German hikers Helmut and Erika Simon in 1991, Ötzi is not just a prehistoric curiosity, he's a veritable time capsule from the Copper Age, brimming with clues about life before smartphones and Starbucks. Now, here's where it gets juicy. The moment Ötzi was unearthed, whispers of a curse began to circulate, like the plot of a B-grade horror movie. Within a few years of his discovery, 7 people connected to Ötzi met untimely deaths. Cue the ominous music, right? But before we get swept away by the melodrama, let's hit pause and inject a little reality. These deaths, while tragic, were statistically unremarkable, given the number of people involved in the excavation and research over the years. It's a classic case of confirmation bias. Our brains love patterns, even when none exist. It's easier to blame a curse than to accept the randomness of life. But the real intrigue lies in what Ötzi tells us about his time. Radiocarbon dating places him at around 3300 BCE, making him older than the pyramids. He was found with an array of tools, including a copper axe, which was a status symbol akin to owning the latest iPhone in his day. His gear reveals a lot about the technological advancements of the era, not to mention his personal style. He rocked a bearskin cap, leather loincloth, and grass cloak, basically the Copper Age equivalent of a Patagonia jacket. Ötzi's body is a treasure trove of insights. Analysis of his stomach contents revealed his last meal, ibex meat and incorn wheat, washed down with a side of berries. Not exactly Michelin-star cuisine, but it paints a vivid picture of the prehistoric diet. Even more fascinating is the presence of pollen in his intestines, indicating that he journeyed from a lower valley to the higher altitudes shortly before his death. This suggests he was on the move, possibly fleeing or hunting, when he met his end. And what an end it was. Ötzi's death wasn't a gentle fade into the alpine mist. A CAT scan unveiled a flint arrowhead lodged in his shoulder, indicating he was likely murdered. This revelation casts Ötzi in a whole new light, not just as a hapless wanderer, but as a man caught up in the gritty realities of prehistoric life, where conflict was as common as bad weather. Beyond his violent demise, Ötzi's tattoos have sparked endless debate. He sports over 60 inked lines and crosses, most of which align with modern acupuncture points. Was he a fan of early alternative medicine, or were these markings part of a tribal ritual? The jury's still out, but it's a tantalizing glimpse into the cultural practices of his time. Now, let's talk economics, or rather the proto-economics of Ötzi's world. His copper axe wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of wealth and power. Copper was a hot commodity, and its possession suggests Ötzi was someone of significance. His tools and clothing also hint at a barter system, where skills and materials were exchanged long before the invention of currency. It's a vivid reminder that even in the Copper Age, human societies were complex and interconnected. Ötzi's discovery has been a boon for tourism in the region, drawing visitors eager to see the world's oldest mummy. The South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Bolzano, where Ötzi now resides, has become a pilgrimage site for history buffs and the curious alike. It's a testament to our ongoing fascination with the past and the mysteries that still linger. So why do curses, like the one supposedly attached to Ötzi, captivate us? Maybe it's the drama, the idea that the past can reach out and touch us with its cold, bony fingers. Or perhaps it's the allure of a story that refuses to be neatly tied up with facts. We love a good mystery, and curses offer a narrative that science can't quite debunk. They remind us that even in our data-driven world, there's room for the inexplicable. As we wrap up our journey through the realm of cursed artifacts, it's clear that these tales are as much about us as they are about the objects themselves. They reflect our fears, our hopes, and our eternal quest for meaning. From the Hope Diamond to Ötzi the Iceman, these stories endure because they tap into something primal. A need to connect with history, to see our own lives mirrored in the lives of those who came before us. In the end, the allure of a curse lies in its ability to transform history into legend, to turn the mundane into the magical. Whether you believe in curses or not, there's no denying their power to captivate and inspire. They remind us that the past is never truly gone, that its echoes linger in the artifacts and stories we pass down through the generations. So, the next time you hear a tale of a cursed artifact, remember that it's more than just a spooky story. It's a reflection of our shared humanity, a testament to the enduring power of storytelling, and a reminder that history is a living, breathing thing full of surprises, mysteries, and the occasional curse. And with that, our exploration into the world of cursed artifacts comes to a close. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your mind curious, because the past is always waiting to reveal its secrets. If you've ever thought the life of a druid was all moonlit rituals and whispering with trees, think again. These guys were the ancient equivalent of a rock band with a cult following, minus the groupies and leather pants. The Druids were the intellectual and spiritual elite of Celtic society, and their allure was as thick as the morning fog over Stonehenge. They were the OG influences, guiding the tribes of ancient Gaul and Britain with a mix of wisdom, wit, and just a hint of mystique. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The Druids weren't just dreamers with a knack for theatrics. They were a real powerhouse in ancient times, blending roles like priest, scholar, and judge into one enigmatic package, with a name that may have originated from the Proto-Celtic Druides, meaning oak knower or wise one. These folks were the go-to gurus for everything from law to philosophy to the afterlife. Think of them as a mix between a Supreme Court justice, a university professor, and your local shaman, all rolled into one. Now, you might be wondering how we know anything about these ancient icons if they didn't leave behind any handy-dandy druid diaries. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Most of what we know comes from their frenemies, the Romans. Yep, the The same folks who brought you straight roads and aqueducts also penned down some juicy details about the Druids. Julius Caesar, in his Commentary de Bello Gallico, that's Commentaries on the Gallic War, for those who skipped Latin class, described them as holding authority over the people and being exempt from military service and taxes. I mean, who wouldn't want that gig? But here's where it gets spicy. The Romans were both fascinated and freaked out by the Druids. They were like the punk rockers of the ancient world, with their wild rituals and mysterious ways. Roman author Tacitus even noted that Druid rituals involved groves of trees and dark rites, which, let's be honest, sounds like the kind of party you'd want to crash just to see what's up. Music played a crucial role in Druidic rituals, and it wasn't just background noise, it was integral to their ceremonies, a way to bridge the human and the divine. Picture this: Druids chanting in resonant tones, the sound wrapping around the oak trees like an ancient Celtic Spotify playlist. The power of music in these settings wasn't just about entertainment. It was believed to have the ability to heal, to enchant, and to call upon the gods themselves. If you're thinking of music festivals with a side of mysticism, you're not far off. And while we're on the subject of music, let's not ignore the instruments. The Druids didn't have electric guitars or synthesizers, but they made do with what they had. Harps, lyres, and a variety of flutes were the tools of their trade. These instruments weren't just for strumming along. They were believed to hold magical properties, capable of influencing the elements and connecting with the spiritual world. It's like the original rock ritual, only with a lot more bark and fewer amps. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or the Roman in the toga. The Romans didn't always get the Druids, and they definitely didn't always like them. Sure, they were impressed by their wisdom and their command over the Celtic tribes, but they were also wary of their influence. In fact, Roman emperors like Tiberius and Claudius tried to suppress the Druids, seeing them as a threat to Roman order. In other words, they were the ancient equivalent of a banned book list. Despite the Roman crackdown, the allure of the Druids never quite faded. Their reputation as mystics and sages lived on, even as their actual practices faded into obscurity. Today they still capture our imagination, partly because they left so much to it. The Druids might not have penned their own history, but their legacy is as enduring as their oak groves, casting long, intriguing shadows over our understanding of the ancient world. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, think about those ancient forests and the haunting melodies that once filled the air. The Druids, with their enigmatic ways and musical traditions, were the rock stars of their time-living legends who knew how to keep an audience spellbound, whether in life or in legend. When you think about the Druids and their musical escapades, it's hard not to picture a wild Celtic jam session in the midst of a forest where the trees are the only judges of talent. But let's hit pause on the romantic visions for a moment and dig into the nitty-gritty of what made these musical maestros tick. The Druids were not just picking up any old stick and calling it a day. Oh no, they were all about the craftsmanship. When it came to choosing their instruments, it was as much about the artistry as it was about the acoustics. Enter the lyre, the humble yet iconic string instrument that was practically the smartphone of its day, ubiquitous, versatile, and always in demand. Crafted from wood like yew or willow and strung with gut strings, the lyre was more than just a musical tool. It was a symbol of status and skill. Think of it as the acoustic guitar you bring to a campfire, but with the added bonus of possibly communicating with the gods. This wasn't just a piece of wood with strings, it was a well-honed instrument that required a deft hand and a keen ear. And unlike today's mass-produced instruments, each lyre was unique, crafted with care by local artisans whose skills were passed down through generations. Talk about bespoke craftsmanship. But if the lyre was the acoustic guitar of the ancient world, the carnix was definitely the electric guitar with a built-in amplifier. Picture this: a long bronze trumpet with a bell shaped like a wild boar's head, ready to blare out sounds that could probably wake the dead. The carnix was all about drama and power, perfect for stirring up the crowd before a big battle or during a high-stakes ritual. Its sound was said to carry across great distances, making it as much a tool for communication as it was for music. And let's be real, if you wanted to announce your presence in the ancient world, nothing said, "I'm here," quite like a blast from a carnix. Archaeological finds have shed some light on these instruments and their significance in Druidic culture. One particularly fascinating discovery was made in Desford, Scotland, where a fragmented carnix was unearthed, offering a tantalizing glimpse into its construction. The Deskford carnix, dating back to around 8200 AD, was initially misidentified as a Roman helmet, which just goes to show that even seasoned archaeologists sometimes confuse war with music. Once properly identified, however, it became clear that the carnix was a masterpiece of metalwork, with intricate details that suggested not just functionality, but also an aesthetic purpose. It was as much about art as it was about noise, serving as a testament to the Druids' dual love for beauty and intimidation. But let's not overlook the economic context here. Crafting these instruments wasn't a mere hobby, it was a serious economic activity. The materials were sourced locally, which meant that the Druidic musicians were tied into the regional economy. Woods were selected carefully for their resonance, and metals like bronze required skilled metallurgists. This wasn't just about making music, it was an industry that supported artisans, traders, and craftsmen. The Druids were essentially cultural patrons, sustaining a whole ecosystem of creatives, minus the Kickstarter campaigns. Now, before you start imagining Druids as the ancient equivalent of a Woodstock lineup, let's debunk a few myths. While the romantic image of Druids serenading the moonlit skies with their mystical tunes is appealing, the reality was probably less harmonious. These instruments, particularly the carnix, weren't exactly known for their soothing melodies. The sound was more about impact than harmony, designed to inspire fear or awe rather than relaxation. So, if you're imagining a serene, Enya-like soundtrack, you might want to reconsider. Think more along the lines of heavy metal meets nature, an acoustic assault with a side of spiritual significance. Yet, for all their fearsome reputation, these instruments played a critical role in Druidic rituals and ceremonies. They were believed to have the power to connect the earthly with the divine, opening channels between the human world and the spiritual realm. It was less about entertainment and more about transcendence. If the lyre was the medium, then the carnix was the message, broadcasting a call to the divine that could not be ignored. As we continue to pluck the strings of history, one thing becomes clear. The Druids were more than just priests with a penchant for music. They were cultural innovators, blending art and spirituality in a way that left a lasting legacy. Their instruments weren't just tools. They were symbols of a complex society that valued both the mystical and the material. And while we may never fully understand the full scope of their musical rituals, the echoes of their ancient tunes continue to resonate, reminding us that sometimes the past is just a haunting melody away. And as we ponder the captivating blend of myth and reality that surrounds these enigmatic figures, it's time to hit play on the next track of our historical playlist. Because, with the Druids, there's always another layer to uncover, another story waiting to be told. So stick around, because this is a concert you won't want to miss. And speaking of layers, let's peel back a few more to see what's really going on beneath the surface of those ancient Druidic jam sessions. While the allure of mystical bards strumming harps under moonlit oaks is enough to make any romantic swoon, the truth is, Druidic music had a lot more to do with power and a lot less to do with serenading the forest spirits. Forget the image of dreamy-eyed poets, think more like political influences with a soundtrack. First off, let's talk about the economic engine behind all that music. Yes, the Druids were cultural patrons, but they were also shrewd operators in a society where resources and connections were everything. The materials for their instruments didn't just fall off the back of a chariot. Crafting a lyre or carnix required a network of local suppliers, woodworkers, metalworkers, and traders who all played a part in the supply chain. This wasn't just about making music, it was about sustaining an economic ecosystem. The Druids' influence extended into these networks, reinforcing their status as the movers and shakers of their time. Consider the cost of constructing a carnix. Bronze was no cheap commodity. It required mining, smelting, and a whole lot of manpower. We're talking about a valuable resource that could have been used for weapons or tools, yet it was devoted to creating these elaborate musical instruments. This choice reveals a society that placed a high premium on the symbolic power of music, seeing it as a tool for both inspiration and intimidation. The investment in such instruments was not just financial. It was a strategic decision to bolster the Druids' influence across social and political arenas. Now, let's address the role these musicians played in society, a role that was less about entertainment and more about exerting control. The Druids weren't just playing for fun, They were orchestrating social cohesion and political allegiance. Picture a ceremony where the sound of the carnix echoed across the hills, rallying warriors for battle or marking the accession of a chieftain. These were not casual gatherings, but carefully orchestrated events where music was a tool of persuasion, a way to galvanize the tribes and assert dominance. And while we're on the subject of influence, let's not forget the Romans. Our toga-clad friends might have been all about roads and baths, but they also had a thing for writing down their impressions of the Druids. Sources like Pliny the Elder and Julius Caesar give us a glimpse into the Roman perspective, albeit with a healthy dose of bias. They describe the Druids' music as part of a larger religious and social framework that was both fascinating and terrifying. To the Romans, the Druids' use of music in rituals was just another example of their outlandish customs, yet one that commanded undeniable respect. But let's not romanticize the Romans too much either. Their accounts, while invaluable, often painted the Druids with the same brush they used for anyone standing in the way of Roman expansion: exotic, dangerous, and in need of civilizing. It's crucial to remember that history is often written by the victors, and in this case, by those who saw the Druids as both rivals and curiosities. The Roman lens isn't a clear window into the past, it's more like a funhouse mirror, distorting reality with a twist of propaganda. Speaking of distortions, let's get back to the idea of the Druids as mystical bards. While it's a charming notion, the reality was more complex. The music was an instrument of statecraft as much as it was of spirituality. It wasn't just about connecting with the divine, it was about grounding their power firmly on earth. The Druids used their musical prowess to solidify alliances, legitimize leaders, and maintain the social hierarchy. This was no mere bardic pastime, it was strategic, calculated, and integral to their authority. And then there's the social dimension. Music served as a unifying force among the Celtic tribes, a shared cultural touchstone that went beyond borders and rivalries. It wasn't just about the sound, it was about the shared experience, the communal participation in something greater than the sum of its parts. The power of music to transcend individual differences and forge a collective identity cannot be overstated. It was the ancient version of a national anthem, played not with trumpets and drums, but with the haunting tones of the lyre and the piercing call of the carnix. In exploring these themes, one can't ignore the practical side of Druidic music, the nuts and bolts, if you will. The instruments themselves were marvels of engineering, crafted with precision and care. The lyre, with its delicate woodwork and taut strings, required a skilled hand both in construction and in performance. It was more than just a musical device, it was a testament to the artisan's craft and the musician's skill. The carnix, on the other hand, was a feat of metallurgy, its bronze body a canvas for intricate designs that spoke to the artistry and expertise of its makers. Yet, for all the craftsmanship and cultural significance, there's a raw, visceral quality to Druidic music that can't be ignored. It wasn't about soothing melodies or harmonious chords, it was about making a statement, leaving an impression. The sound was meant to be felt as much as heard, resonating deep within the listener and stirring something primal within the soul. It was an experience, a sensory encounter that went beyond the auditory to engage the listener on multiple levels. As we delve deeper into the world of Druidic music, it becomes clear that the reality is far more intriguing than the myth. The Druids were not just mystical bards, but masterful manipulators of sound and society. Their music was a tool of power, a means of control, and a reflection of their complex cultural landscape. So, the next time you hear the echoes of ancient melodies drifting through the pages of history, remember that the truth, like a well-played tune, is often more resonant than the legend. Stay tuned, because we've got more notes to hit and more myths to bust. The Druid story is far from over, and there's still plenty of music left to explore. But hold your horses, or should I say, hold your chariots, because as we gallop into the realm of cultural exchange between the Druids and Romans, things get even more intriguing. You might think the Romans, with their penchant for conquering and civilizing, would have steamrolled right over the Druids' mystical melodies with their own brand of imperial fanfare. However, the reality is more akin to a two-way street, or in this case, a two-way ancient dirt road, bumpy and full of surprises. Let's dive into the mind of a Roman, shall we? Picture them arriving in Celtic lands, sandals dusty from the journey, only to be greeted not with the clamour of a Roman parade, but with the haunting, otherworldly strains of the Druidic lyre. To the Romans, this was like walking into a silent disco where everyone but them had headphones. They were fascinated and, quite frankly, a bit confused. Here were these barbarians, as they liked to call anyone not Roman, with a cultural sophistication that didn't quite fit the savage stereotype. Roman accounts, often dripping with a mix of awe and condescension, give us a window into this cultural exchange. The likes of Caesar and Tacitus documented the Druids with a blend of respect and disdain, describing their music as part of their barbaric rites. But while the Romans were quick to slap a label on anything that didn't involve togas or the Latin language, they couldn't entirely dismiss the Druids' musical prowess. This wasn't just noise, it was an art form that resonated with meaning and purpose. And let's not forget the Roman knack for appropriation. These guys were the original remix artists, borrowing and blending cultural elements from the lands they conquered. While they might have scoffed at Druidic practices publicly, behind closed doors, it was a different story. The Romans were known to adopt certain Celtic instruments and musical styles, much like a modern band picking up influences from world music. It's a classic case of don't tell anyone, but I love their sound. The cultural osmosis doesn't stop there. Roman banquets, known for their lavishness and excess, may have been spiced up with a touch of Druidic flair. Imagine a Roman noble trying to impress their guests by incorporating a lyre performance, claiming it was the latest trend from across the channel. It's not entirely far-fetched to think that the Romans, with their endless appetite for the exotic, would have found ways to incorporate elements of Celtic music into their own shindigs. After all, who could resist a good tune, even if it came from the other side of the empire? But let's not get too carried away with the image of Romans strumming lyres while sipping wine. The exchange was more subtle and nuanced than that. It was about the blending of ideas, the cross-pollination of cultural practices that often happens when two societies come into contact. While the Romans might not have fully embraced the Druidic way of life, they certainly couldn't ignore the cultural undercurrents that flowed through the Celtic lands. Take the Roman festivals, for instance. Some historians suggest that the Celts' musical traditions, particularly their use of instruments like the horn and drum, influenced the pomp and circumstance of Roman celebrations. It's as if the beats of the carnix echoed across the Mediterranean, finding their way into the heart of Roman festivities. The idea of using music to rally people, to create a sense of community and belonging, was a concept that both cultures understood, albeit in their own unique ways. And while we're talking about influence, let's flick the script a bit. The Druids, too, weren't immune to Roman allure. They were shrewd enough to recognize the value of Roman innovations, particularly in the realm of technology and communication. While they didn't exactly start paving roads or building aqueducts, the Druids did engage in a form of cultural adaptation. They learned to navigate the complex Roman political landscape, using their own brand of diplomacy to maintain their influence. Economically, the Roman presence brought new opportunities and challenges for the Druids. The influx of Roman goods and ideas meant that the Celtic economy had to adapt. The Druids, with their fingers in many pies, were likely involved in facilitating trade and managing resources. They were the middlemen, the brokers of cultural and economic exchange, ensuring that the Celtic way of life could coexist alongside Roman rule. In a sense, they were the ancient world's version of cultural diplomats, ensuring that their traditions endured even as the world around them changed. Yet, let's not romanticize this exchange too much. The Romans were still conquerors, and their accounts were colored by the politics of power. The Druids, depicted as wild and untamed, were often the victims of Roman propaganda, painted as obstacles to be overcome rather than partners in cultural dialogue. The Romans' attempts to suppress Druidic practices, including their music, were part of a broader strategy to impose control and order on the Celtic lands. But despite the Roman efforts to quash their influence, the Druids' legacy endured. Their music, their rituals, and their sense of identity persisted, even as the Roman Empire rose and fell. If anything, the cultural exchange between the Druids and the Romans is a testament to the resilience of human culture, the way it adapts and evolves in the face of change. And as we continue to explore this fascinating intersection of cultures, it's clear that the story of the Druids and the Romans is far from over. The echoes of their exchange resonate through history, a reminder that even in the face of conquest, cultural dialogue can create something new and enduring. So stay tuned, because there's more to uncover, more layers to peel back, and more notes to hit in this ancient symphony of history. The cultural interplay between Druids and Romans left a legacy that's as tangled as a Celtic knot. Fast forward to today, and you might notice that Druidic traditions have been given a serious makeover, kind of like a 90s band going on a reunion tour with a modern twist. Romanticized or not, the allure of these ancient melodies still strikes a chord pun absolutely intended. Let's take a look at the way these traditions have been reimagined. Druidic music has often been associated with the ethereal and mystical, a sort of New Age soundtrack for your yoga class. This isn't entirely off base, but definitely a far cry from the frenetic war cries of the Carnics. If modern interpretations are to be believed, you might think Druids were the chillest guys around, casually strumming their harps under a starry sky. Never mind the Roman accounts of them being anything but chill. The romantic image is compelling, but the reality was probably more about strategic rituals than Zen retreats. Then there's the whole idea of Druids as nature-loving pacifists, which modern culture has latched onto like a cat on a laser pointer. The truth is, while they certainly had a deep connection to nature, their role was also deeply entwined with politics and societal control. Think of them less as tree-hugging hippies, and more as ancient power brokers who knew how to use a good melody to keep people in line. The romantic vision has its charm, but let's not gloss over the fact that these oak knowers were as much about order as they were about oaks. What about their instruments? In the modern revival of Celtic music, you'll often spot replicas of ancient lyres and carnacies at folk festivals. But here's the kicker. While these reproductions pay homage to the past, they're often built with contemporary techniques and materials. Because, let's be real, not many people are up for gut-stringing a lyre these days. The fascination with authenticity is there, but practicality often takes the front seat. The Druids might have been all about bespoke craftsmanship, but today's crafters know a thing or two about efficiency. The romantic notion of Druids also finds its way into pop culture, where they're often depicted as wise sages or mystical guides. Movies and TV shows love to cast them in roles that are as enigmatic as they are inaccurate. It's appealing to think of Druids as kindly old wizards with a penchant for riddles, but the historical record is less about Gandalf and more about governance. Still, who can resist a good myth? Our collective imagination tends to fill in the gaps with stories that, while not entirely true, are undeniably captivating. Now, let's talk about what draws us to Druidic lore in the first place. Part of it is the mystery. The Druids left behind no written records of their own, which means we rely on second-hand accounts and archaeological finds to piece together their story. This lack of concrete evidence leaves plenty of room for speculation, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It keeps the conversation going and the curiosity alive. But as we dive into these tales, it's crucial to distinguish between what we know and what we think we know. The line between history and legend is as fine as a Druid's harp string, and it's all too easy to get tangled up. However, the enduring appeal of Druidic traditions isn't just about the mystery. It's about what they represent, a connection to nature, a reverence for the past, and a reminder that music has always been a powerful force in human society. The Druids may not have left us their own version of Top of the Pops, but their influence on music and culture is unmistakable. They remind us that even in a world dominated by technology and change, there's something timeless about the sound of a well-struck chord. In a world where the past is often overshadowed by the present, the Druids offer a glimpse into a time when music was more than just entertainment. It was a tool of power, a means of communication, and a bridge between worlds. The romanticized view of the Druids may be far removed from reality, but it speaks to a deeper truth. Our fascination with the past is as much about understanding ourselves as it is about understanding history. So, the next time you hear the lilting notes of a Celtic tune or see a depiction of a wise old Druid, take a moment to appreciate the blend of myth and reality. The romantic image might not be entirely accurate, but it's a testament to the enduring legacy of a culture that knew the power of a good song. And as we continue to explore the echoes of their ancient melodies, we find that the Druids still have much to teach us about music, about history, and about the stories we tell to make sense of it all. In wrapping up our time-traveling tour through the musical traditions of the Druids, it's clear that their legacy is as complex as it is captivating. Separating fact from fiction is no easy task, but it's a worthy endeavor. After all, understanding the truth behind the myth allows us to appreciate the full scope of their influence, not just as mystical figures, but as pivotal players in the history of music and culture. The Druids may not have penned their own history, but their story resonates across the ages, reminding us that the past is never truly silent. So, as you drift off to sleep with visions of ancient forests and haunting tunes, remember this: the Druids' legacy is as much about the music they played as it is about the myths they inspired. And in a world that's constantly changing, those ancient notes still have the power to connect us to something timeless. You wake to the rhythmic clang of hammers and the smell of salt and tar wafting in from the port. The year? 1230. The place? Hamburg, a bustling hub of trade in the heart of the Hanseatic League. It's a city that never sleeps, at least not the parts where deals are made and fortunes are won or lost. You, my friend, are about to dive headfirst into the frenetic world of medieval commerce, where the stakes are as high as the masts on the ships that line the harbour. The Hanseatic League is the medieval equivalent of a multinational corporation. Only imagine if Apple, Amazon and Google all decided to team up. Formed in the late 12th century, this powerhouse of merchants dominated trade across the Baltic and North Seas. By the 13th century, it had grown into an economic juggernaut comprising over 200 cities. You can feel the League's influence pulsating through every market, stall and warehouse. Its roots are deep in the fertile soil of necessity and opportunity. After all, who needs dragons when you have the cutthroat world of trade to keep things spicy? As you make your way to the docks, the scene is nothing short of chaos, albeit the organized kind. Ships from Lübeck, Rostock, and the far reaches of Novgorod are docked, their sails furled, their holds bursting with goods. Grain, timber, and herring are the holy trinity here, as essential to Hamburg's economy as oxygen is to breathing. In fact, herring is practically the medieval version of the Bitcoin frenzy. Everyone wants a piece, and the market is booming. Fun fact, at the height of the herring trade, these little fish were so valuable they were sometimes used as currency. Yes, you heard that right, fish as money. No wonder the docks are swarming with traders eager to unload their cargo before the scent of their profits becomes too, well, aromatic. Let's talk numbers for a moment, because what is history without a bit of math to keep you on your toes? A single cog, a type of ship that's the workhorse of the Hanseatic fleet, could carry up to 200 tons of cargo. That's about the weight of 33 African elephants, in case you're wondering, and the goods they carried weren't just limited to the essentials. Luxury items like furs, spices and textiles were also in the mix, catering to the tastes of the medieval one-percenters lounging in their stone fortresses. But why is Hamburg such a hotbed of activity? Its location is key. Situated at the mouth of the River Elbe, it's perfectly positioned as a gateway between the North Sea and the interior of Europe. This strategic spot makes it a magnet for merchants looking to move goods efficiently across the continent. Plus, Hamburg's status as a free city meant it had the autonomy to make its own rules, a perk that attracted traders like moths to a flame. As you stroll past the warehouses, you can almost taste the ambition in the air. Traders haggle over every last penny, their voices rising above the cacophony of the port. The competition here is fierce, every deal a game of wits where the stakes are livelihoods. But don't let the hustle fool you. Beneath the surface, alliances are being forged and broken as quickly as you can say profit margin. The Hanseatic League might be a collective, but individual traders are in it for themselves, each one hoping to outsmart the other and secure a slice of the pie. And here's where we bust a few myths. The League is often romanticized as a benevolent force of commerce, a kind of medieval United Nations. But peel back the layers, and you'll find a ruthless organization that monopolized trade routes and bullied competitors out of business. The League had its own fleet of ships, not just for transporting goods, but also for defending its interests with a bit of naval muscle where necessary. Think of it as a medieval version of corporate warfare, only with more swords and fewer lawsuits. The origins of the League are rooted in self-preservation. As piracy and feudal conflicts threatened the trade routes, merchants realized they were stronger together than apart. It was less about camaraderie and more about survival. By banding together, They could negotiate better deals and protect their interests with a unified front. But like any power structure, it wasn't without its internal squabbles. Cities often vied for dominance, each one eager to be the star of the League's trading show. You'll find that history is often a tangled web of contradictions and complexities, much like the docks of Hamburg themselves. The romantic notion of the Hanseatic League as a harmonious coalition of merchants glosses over the cutthroat reality of medieval trade. It was a world where profit reigned supreme, and the only loyalty was to the bottom line. So as you wander through this bustling marketplace, remember that every handshake could just as easily be a dagger in the back. Welcome to the world of 13th century commerce, where the only constant is change, and the stakes are as high as the cathedral spires that pierce the Hamburg skyline. So, after navigating the bustling marketplace with its symphony of shouted deals and clinking coins, you find yourself venturing deeper into the labyrinthine warehouse district of Hamburg. It's a real maze, a tangle of timber and stone where every corner turned could lead to a new opportunity or a dead end. Welcome to the nerve centre of Hanseatic trade, where the real magic happens, not with wands and spells, but with ink and contracts. Now, let's talk about the Hanseatic League's legal framework, which is just as fascinating as its economic might. Lübeck, known fondly as the Queen of the Hanse, plays a starring role here. This city wasn't just any port, it was the nerve centre of the League, the New York Stock Exchange of its time, if you will. Lübeck was where the rules were made and disputes settled, a kind of medieval Geneva Convention for merchants. Imagine a council of bearded traders debating tariffs and trade routes instead of kings and knights plotting conquests. That's Lübeck for you, a city that turned bureaucracy into an art form. The League's legal system was ahead of its time, a bit like finding Wi-Fi in a medieval castle. We're talking about a set of rules that govern trade routes, resolve disputes, and even establish shipping insurance. Yes, you heard right, shipping insurance in the 1200s. The Hanseatic League had figured out that when you're sending a ship full of precious cargo into pirate-infested waters, a little risk management goes a long way. Merchants pooled their resources to cover potential losses, a communal safety net that kept the wheels of commerce turning smoothly. It was a system that would make any modern insurance broker nod in approval. And speaking of pirates, let's not romanticize them too much. These weren't charming rogues with a penchant for rum and catchy sea shanties. Nope, they were more like the medieval version of ransomware, unpredictable and downright terrifying. Pirates were a constant threat to the Hanseatic traders, lurking in the shadows of the Baltic Sea, ready to pounce on unguarded ships. The League responded by organizing convoys and arming their vessels, transforming trade routes into naval battlegrounds. It was a gritty reality where every voyage was a high-stakes gamble, a roll of the dice where the odds were often stacked against you. Back on solid ground, the warehouse district is buzzing with activity. Here, deals are made with a handshake or the scratch of a quill on parchment. Goods are weighed and measured, prices haggled over until both parties grudgingly agree. It's a world where the value of a single grain shipment can make or break a trader's fortunes. And while grain, timber and herring were the backbone of Hanseatic trade, luxury items like silks from the East or spices from the Indies added a touch of glamour and profit to the mix. Let's not forget the human element amidst all these goods and numbers. The traders themselves, a motley crew of ambitious souls, each with their own story. Some were seasoned veterans who could smell a bad deal from a mile away, while others were fresh-faced novices eager to make their mark. It was a community bound by commerce rather than blood, a fraternity of merchants united by the pursuit of profit. And like any close-knit group, it had its fair share of rivalries and alliances, betrayals and reconciliations. As you wander through this hive of activity, take a moment to appreciate the sheer audacity of it all. The Hanseatic League wasn't just a trading network, it was a testament to human ingenuity and adaptability. In a world where kingdoms rose and fell with alarming regularity, the League endured, a beacon of stability in a sea of chaos. It was a testament to the power of commerce, a reminder that money talks louder than any king or emperor. And yet, for all its might and influence, the League was not invincible. Internal disputes and external pressures would eventually take their toll, but for now, in this moment, it stands as a symbol of medieval innovation and ambition. So take a deep breath and soak it all in, the sounds, the smells, the sheer energy of it all. This is the world of a Hanseatic trader, a world where fortunes are made and lost, and every day brings a new opportunity or a new threat. As the sun climbs higher, casting its golden light over the docks, you realize that this isn't just a day in the life of a medieval trader. It's a glimpse into the very essence of human nature, the drive to succeed, to innovate, to thrive, even in the face of adversity. And as you prepare to dive deeper into this fascinating world, remember that history isn't just about the past. It's about the stories we tell and the lessons we learn, the myths we create and the realities we uncover. So let's keep exploring, shall we? There's so much more to discover in the world of the Hanseatic League, and here we are, with the sun hanging high like a golden coin in the sky, casting its light on the bustling port of Hamburg. This city, a veritable hive of activity, is now alive with the chatter of traders and the clinking of coins, a sound as intoxicating as the finest wine. By now, you're probably realizing that the Hanseatic League wasn't just about moving goods from point A to point B, it was about power, influence, and, dare I say it, a bit of medieval swagger. Let's dive headfirst into the political game, where Hanseatic traders wielded influence like a well-balanced sword. This wasn't just your run-of-the-mill market bartering, this was high-stakes diplomacy. Picture this: a web of alliances stretching from London to Novgorod, each thread representing a delicate relationship that could make or break a trader's fortune. The League was a masterclass in political maneuvering, and its members were like chess players with a keen eye for strategy. Now, here's a fun fact to chew on. At its zenith, the Hanseatic League boasted over 200 member cities. That's right, 200. And each city was like a shareholder in this medieval corporation, contributing to and benefiting from the collective clout. But with great power comes great responsibility, and, of course, plenty of drama. You see, not all cities were created equal, and some wielded more influence than others. Lübeck, for instance, was the de facto leader, calling the shots like the CEO of a powerful conglomerate. It was a city that could make emperors quiver in their crowns. In 1370, the Treaty of Stralsund saw the League force the King of Denmark to his knees, securing trading privileges that made them the rock stars of the Baltic. But let's not get too starry-eyed. Maintaining these alliances was no walk in the park. It required constant negotiation, a bit of backdoor dealing, and sometimes a good old-fashioned bribe. In fact, the League wasn't above bending the rules to suit its needs. There were times when its members would engage in embargoes or outright blockades to strong-arm rivals into submission. It was the medieval equivalent of playing hardball, and the stakes were as high as the towers of St. Mary's Church in Lübeck. As you stroll through the streets of Hamburg, the social dynamics of the Hanseatic traders come into sharp focus. These weren't mere merchants, they were movers and shakers, a class unto themselves. Their clothing was a statement, woolen cloaks dyed in rich hues, a sign of wealth and status that set them apart from the common folk. And let's not forget the ubiquitous hoods, which served as both a practical accessory and a subtle nod to their fraternity. Dining, too, was an indicator of one's place in the social hierarchy. While the average citizen might subsist on a diet of rye bread and porridge, our Hanseatic friends dined on imported delicacies like salted fish, exotic spices, and the occasional roast fowl. Meals were a social affair, a chance to schmooze with fellow traders and forge alliances over a flagon of ale. And speaking of ale, it was the beverage of choice, a safe alternative to water, which had a nasty habit of harbouring all sorts of unpleasantness. But life wasn't all feasts and finery. For every banquet held in a candlelit hall, there were the gritty realities of maintaining a network that spanned continents. Communication was a challenge. A letter from Hamburg to London could take weeks, if not months, to arrive. And in a world without smartphones, staying in the loop was as tricky as catching a fish with your bare hands. Traders relied on a network of trusted couriers, each one entrusted with critical information that could sway a deal or avert disaster. And then there was the social pecking order, a hierarchy as rigid as the iron chains used to lock the city gates at night. At the top were the merchant princes, those who had amassed enough wealth to influence policy and sway decisions. They were the kingpins of the League, respected and feared in equal measure. Below them were the rank-and-file traders, skilled in the art of negotiation, but lacking the clout to dictate terms. But let's not forget the unsung heroes of this grand enterprise. The sailors and dock workers who toiled day and night to keep the gears of commerce turning. These were the men who braved the treacherous seas, navigating by stars and surviving on salt pork and hardtack. Their lives were a stark contrast to the opulence enjoyed by the merchants, a reminder that behind every fortune lay a tale of sweat and sacrifice. As the afternoon sun casts its long shadows, illuminating the cobbled streets of Hamburg, you find yourself immersed in a world where commerce and politics dance a delicate waltz. The Hanseatic traders were the architects of their destiny, building an empire of trade that defied the odds and reshaped the medieval world. And yet, for all their might and mastery, they were still subject to the whims of fate and fortune. So as you continue your journey through this fascinating tapestry of history, remember that the Hanseatic League was more than a footnote in the annals of time. It was a testament to the power of human ambition, a reminder that even in an age of kings and castles, a group of determined individuals could change the course of history. And with that thought, let's keep moving forward, shall we? There's so much more to uncover in the world of 13th century trade, and the adventure is just beginning. As the sun dips lower and casts an amber glow over Hamburg, the bustling port transforms into a shadowy stage where myths and legends of the Hanseatic League begin to dance in the twilight. Ah, the Hanseatic League, often painted as a merry band of gallant merchants, noble in their pursuits and valiant on their trade routes. You'd think they were the Robin Hoods of the high seas, minus the tights and archery skills. But let's peel back that shiny veneer and see what lies beneath, shall we? First, the notion of the League as a benevolent force for good is as misleading as a map to El Dorado. Sure, the merchants were savvy, but altruism wasn't exactly their guiding star. The League was about as philanthropic as a cat with a mouse. They were in it for the profit, plain and simple. And while stories might cast them as medieval do-gooders, the reality often looked more like a medieval version of the mafia, a tight-knit group with a penchant for bending the rules to their advantage. Consider the tale of the Hanseatic Peace, a supposed era of prosperity and tranquility ushered in by the League's dominance. Sounds lovely, right? Not so fast. This so-called peace was often enforced through embargoes and blockades, economic chokeholds meant to make rivals see things the Hanseatic way. It's like calling it a peaceful negotiation when one party is holding all the cards and a couple of extra aces up their sleeve. When the League decided to flex its muscles, cities like Bergen and Bruges had little choice but to fall in line or face economic isolation. And then there's the romanticized image of the traders themselves, portrayed as dashing, swashbuckling figures with a heart for adventure. Truth be told, they were more akin to today's hedge fund managers than any kind of knight in shining armor. Their battles were fought over ledger books and market shares, not fair maidens and dragons. And speaking of dragons, the real beasts they faced were the financial risks and political minefields of the medieval market. Now, let's talk about the legend of the Hanseatic Brotherhood, a tale of unity and solidarity among merchants. In reality, it was more like a family reunion where not everyone gets along. Sure, they had each other's backs when pirates attacked, but when it came to splitting profits or divvying up trade routes, things got dicey. The League was a patchwork quilt of alliances, some stitched tight, others fraying at the edges. It was a bit like trying to herd cats, with each city jostling for its piece of the pie. And yet, for all the talk of camaraderie, the League's members were not above a bit of backstabbing. Lübeck, the League's de facto leader, was known to play favourites, showering certain cities with privileges while leaving others out in the cold. It was a cutthroat world where today's ally could be tomorrow's adversary, and loyalty was as fleeting as the northern lights. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. The myths do have their charm, and they serve a purpose. They paint a picture of a world where merchants weren't just bean counters but heroes of trade, navigating uncharted waters with courage and cunning. These tales, while exaggerated, capture the spirit of the age, an era where commerce was the lifeblood of cities, and traders were the architects of their destinies. Now, let's sprinkle in some concrete numbers to ground this myth-busting expedition. At its peak, the League's influence stretched over 4,000 miles of coastline, from the icy waters of the North Sea to the bustling markets of Novgorod. That's about the distance from New York to Honolulu, just to give you a little perspective. And they didn't just trade in fish and grain, They dealt in luxury goods that would make even the most jaded aristocrat raise an eyebrow. Furs from Russia, silks from China, and spices from the Indies. These were the commodities that filled the League's coffers and fueled its expansion. But here's where it gets tricky. How do you separate the fact from the fiction when the Hanseatic League's own records were as much about crafting a legacy as chronicling the truth? The merchants left behind a paper trail that was part historical document, part self-aggrandizing PR. It's like reading a resume where every line is designed to make you look like a rock star. They chronicled their victories in trade and diplomacy, but conveniently glossed over the less savoury tactics used to get there. Take, for instance, the famous Hanseatic seal, an emblem of trust and integrity, or so they claimed. In reality, it was more like a medieval security badge, a symbol that promised protection and cooperation, but also a reminder of the League's power to ostracize those who dared to defy them. It was a badge of honor for members, but a warning sign for outsiders. And let's not forget the stories of gallant Hanseatic convoys, braving the high seas to deliver precious cargo. These tales often leave out the grittier details, like the fact that these convoys were armed to the teeth and ready to engage in a bit of naval fisticuffs if necessary. The sea was a battlefield, and the League ships were more akin to war horses than mere vessels of commerce. So, as Hamburg streets grow quieter and the last of the merchants wind down their day's dealings, we find ourselves at the crossroads of myth and reality. The Hanseatic League was neither the benevolent force nor the ruthless cartel it is often painted as. It was a complex, multifaceted entity shaped by the ambitions and rivalries of its members. Its legacy is a tapestry of triumphs and tribulations woven together by the art of storytelling. And as you stand here, pondering the stories that have shaped our understanding of the past, remember that history is as much about the tales we tell as it is about the events that transpired. The myths of the Hanseatic League may be embellished, but they capture the essence of an era, a world where commerce was king, and the only limits were those set by the horizon. So let's keep the story going, shall we? The night is young, and there are still many more layers to uncover in this fascinating saga of trade and triumph. As the evening deepens, casting long shadows over the cobblestones of Hamburg, it's time to take a step back and reflect on the grand tapestry woven by the Hanseatic League. A tale of innovation, ambition, and more than a touch of medieval cunning. While the League might not have donned capes or wielded swords, its legacy is every bit as legendary. So, let's dive into how this consortium of traders, with their audacious flair and sometimes dubious ethics, paved the way for modern economic systems. First off, let's talk about their legal innovations, which were as groundbreaking as inventing sliced bread only with more parchment and fewer crumbs. The Hanseatic League was a pioneer in creating a standardized legal framework across its sprawling network of cities. This wasn't just about keeping the peace, it was about ensuring that trade could flow as smoothly as a well-oiled cog. By establishing common laws, the League mitigated the chaos of dealing with disparate local customs and practices. It's like they invented the medieval version of the European Union centuries before the concept was even a glimmer in anyone's eye. These legal codes weren't just for show either. They included everything from regulations on weights and measures to rules for settling disputes. Think of it as a medieval Better Business Bureau, but with a bit more bite. And let's not forget the brilliant concept of shipping insurance, which the League practically invented. Sure, it might sound as exciting as watching paint dry, but imagine the peace of mind it brought. After all, the seas were teeming with pirates who made Johnny Depp look like a choir boy. By pooling resources to cover potential losses, Hanseatic merchants could sleep a little easier at night, assuming the rats in their inns didn't keep them awake. Now, on to trade practices. The League's influence wasn't just about who could haggle the best price in the market square. It was about the control of entire trade routes, dictating the flow of goods, like a maestro conducting an orchestra. They dominated the salt trade, which was essentially the medieval equivalent of controlling oil reserves. Salt was crucial. Without it, preserving food was about as challenging as herding cats. And then there's herring, that slippery little fish that was worth its weight in gold. The League cornered the market, turning it into a veritable gold mine and cementing their economic dominance. But here's where it gets juicy. The Hanseatic League wasn't above playing dirty to maintain its hegemony. When persuasion failed, they weren't shy about using blockades or embargoes to bring competitors to their knees. If you've ever wondered where modern economic sanctions got their start, look no further. The League was the original bad boy of economic strong-arming, leveraging its collective power to get what it wanted. It was a bit like Game of Thrones, only with fewer dragons and more dried fish. Yet, for all their scheming, the League's influence eventually waned, a victim of its own success and the shifting sands of history. The political landscape of Europe was changing faster than a trader could say profit margin. The rise of powerful nation-states and the advent of new trade routes across the Atlantic meant that the Hanseatic League was no longer the big fish in a small pond. By the late 16th century, the discovery of the Americas was like a meteor strike to their business model, as new sources of wealth and goods burst onto the scene. Despite its decline, the League's legacy is as enduring as a medieval stone cathedral, solid, imposing, and intricate. It laid the groundwork for modern capitalism, showing that cooperation could be as powerful as conquest. The League was a testament to the idea that the pen and the ledger could be mightier than the sword. Their innovative practices in trade and law have echoes in today's WTO agreements and international business norms. And let's not forget the human element. The Hanseatic League was a microcosm of human nature, showcasing the best and worst of our instincts. It was a grand experiment in collaboration and competition, where ambition and ingenuity met greed and rivalry head-on. The traders were the protagonists of their own epics, navigating a world as unpredictable as a North Sea storm, driven by the timeless pursuit of wealth and power. So, as the stars twinkle over Hamburg and the city settles into the hush of night, we bid farewell to the bustling docks and the spirited merchants who once strode them. The Hanseatic League may be consigned to the annals of history, but its spirit lingers on, a reminder that even in the most tumultuous times, trade and cooperation can light the way forward. And as you drift off into slumber, let the stories of the League's audacious traders, with their bold dreams and daring deeds, fill your imagination. They were not just merchants. They were the architects of a new world, and their legacy continues to shape our own. Sleep well, my friend, for tomorrow brings new adventures and a fresh page in the endless saga of history. In a world where teenage trouble often involves sneaking out past curfew, Alexander the Great was busy taming a horse that nobody else could ride. That's right, while most kids were being grounded for staying out too late, young Alexander was engaging in a high-stakes game of equine psychology. Bucephalus, the horse in question, was as wild as a late-night college party, except with more hooves and fewer red solo cups. The story goes that Alexander, at the tender age of 12, noticed the horse was afraid of its own shadow. By turning the beast towards the sun, he calmed it down and mounted it, proving himself a budding master of both strategy and showmanship. But hold your horses, pun intended, because this tale, as charming as it is, might be more myth than reality, a bit of PR crafted by those ancient Macedonian spin doctors. Speaking of spin, let's talk about the man behind young Alex's brainy exploits, none other than Aristotle. This Greek philosopher was like the Yoda to Alexander's Luke Skywalker. Aristotle wasn't just some guy with a toga and a beard, he was the intellectual heavyweight of the era, operating around 384–322 BCE. Under his tutelage, Alexander absorbed everything from philosophy to science, and even a bit of politics. A curriculum that didn't include any multiple-choice exams, but did feature a lot of scrolls and perhaps some vigorous debates. Aristotle's influence on Alexander was profound. He taught him to think critically, to question, and to conquer with cunning rather than brute force. This wasn't just an exercise in making Alexander the star student of Macedonia's class of 340 BCE. It was laying the groundwork for a campaign that would stretch across 3 continents. Alexander inherited a brain that could rival a modern think tank, making him as much a strategist as a fighter. It was a mind as sharp as a Spartan spear, but with a bit more nuance. Meanwhile, the political climate of Macedonia was anything but tranquil. Picture a Game of Thrones episode, minus the dragons, but with all the backstabbing and intrigue. Alexander's father, King Philip II, was busy transforming Macedonia from a backwater kingdom into a military powerhouse. Thanks in no small part to his introduction of the phalanx, a tight-knit infantry formation that would leave enemies quaking in their sandals. The Macedonian military was the ancient equivalent of a well-oiled machine, poised to steamroll over anyone foolish enough to stand in its path. But let's not forget the economics of the situation. Macedonia was rich in resources, a fact not lost on young Alexander. The kingdom's coffers were filling up faster than a Black Friday shopping cart, thanks to silver mines and lucrative trade routes. This wealth wasn't just about bling or battle, it was the fuel for empire-building dreams. In this context, Alexander's ambitions were less about adolescent fantasies and more about cold, hard calculations. He was no delusional dreamer. He was a pragmatic planner, understanding that conquering wasn't just about swinging swords, but also about keeping those treasure chests brimming. As Alexander came of age, the political landscape was a minefield, with alliances as fickle as a cat in a room full of laser pointers. The Greeks, divided among city-states like Athens, Sparta, and Thebes, were both rivals and eventual subjects of Macedonia's might. Meanwhile, Persia loomed large to the east, an empire that wasn't about to roll out the welcome mat for a Macedonian expansion. Alexander's early exposure to these realities was like a masterclass in realpolitik, as he learned to navigate the complex web of alliances and rivalries that defined the era. Now, while tales of Alexander's childhood may be sprinkled with romanticized anecdotes, like his alleged cutting of the Gordian knot with a single slice of his sword, what's undeniable is the strategic acumen he developed from an early age. This wasn't just about solving puzzles or riding horses, it was about preparing for the real challenges ahead, ones that would involve not just conquering lands, but also managing them. Each lesson from Aristotle was less a step on a path to enlightenment and more a rung on a ladder to power. As we wrap up this chapter of Alexander's life, it's worth noting that while his story might be peppered with tall tales, the reality is no less compelling. He was a young man groomed for greatness, surrounded by influences that would shape him into one of history's most formidable leaders. Whether or not he really tamed Bucephalus or sliced through a knot, Alexander's early years set the stage for his future conquests. And if nothing else, it gives us a glimpse into the mind of a boy who would grow up not just to play the game, but to change its very rules. And so, with the stage set for greatness, Alexander's journey into the annals of history wasn't just a matter of destiny, but a complex dance of strategy and circumstance. Fast forward a few years from his tutelage under Aristotle, and we find Alexander stepping into the sandals of power in 336 BCE, under circumstances as murky as a politician's promise. His father, King Philip II, met a rather abrupt end, assassinated during a wedding feast by one of his own bodyguards. Talk about a plot twist. If HBO ever decides to pick up this story, they'll have no shortage of material for dramatic cliffhangers. Now, the death of Philip wasn't just a family tragedy, it was a geopolitical tremor. Macedonia was a powder keg of ambitions and alliances, and Alexander, at just 20 years old, found himself in the hot seat. The young king didn't just inherit a kingdom, he inherited a complex web of political intrigue and unfinished business. The Greek city-states were eyeing Macedonia with a mix of resentment and fear, hoping perhaps that the young king might stumble. But Alexander wasn't about to let his father's empire crumble like a poorly baked souffle. First order of business? Consolidate power in Greece. Alexander moved quickly, a whirlwind of charisma and military prowess, reminding the Greeks that Macedonian might was not to be trifled with. Thebes, ever the rebel, decided to test this new king's mettle. Bad move. In a show of force that would make any modern military strategist nod in approval, Alexander razed Thebes to the ground in 335 BCE, sparing only the temples and the house of the poet Pindar. It was a stark message, one that said, "Mess with the bull, you get the horns." The city's destruction was swift and ruthless, a brutal reminder that Alexander meant business, and that poetic talent might just save your skin. With Greece pacified and the Macedonian throne secure, Alexander turned his gaze eastward, towards the sprawling Persian Empire. This wasn't just a military campaign, it was a quest for glory, wealth, and something more elusive, immortality in the pages of history. The logistics alone were enough to make any modern military quartermaster break out in a cold sweat. Imagine moving an army of tens of thousands across deserts, mountains, and rivers, all without the aid of Google Maps or GPS. His forces included the formidable Macedonian phalanx, a block of soldiers bristling with sarissas, spears that were over 18 feet long. Picture a hedgehog with attitude, and you're halfway there. But let's not romanticize the realities of ancient warfare. It wasn't all gleaming armor and heroic charges. The campaigns were grueling, the conditions harsh, supply lines stretched thin, disease rampant, and morale a constant concern. The cost of war was staggering, both in human lives and in resources. Alexander had to feed an army that could eat its way through a small town's worth of food every day. Talk about a logistical nightmare. This wasn't about just marching to the beat of a war drum. It was about ensuring that every soldier had enough bread and water to keep going, a task as monumental as the battles themselves. Then came the infamous Battle of Issus in 33 BCE, where Alexander's forces met Darius III of Persia. The Macedonian army, though outnumbered, was a well-oiled machine, executing maneuvers with a precision that would make any drill sergeant proud. Darius, on the other hand, had an army as cumbersome and unwieldy as a school bus doing a three-point turn. Yet, the battle wasn't just about tactics. It was a clash of cultures, East versus West, with the fate of the known world hanging in the balance. Alexander, ever the showman, led a cavalry charge that broke the Persian lines and sent Darius fleeing in his chariot, leaving behind his family and riches. An awkward holiday gathering waiting to happen. The victory at Issus was a turning point, but it came at a cost. Casualty figures are hard to pin down, but estimates suggest the thousands on both sides were left dead or wounded. And while the glory of victory was sweet, the aftermath was anything but. Managing an empire wasn't just about winning battles. It was about stitching together diverse peoples under one rule, a Herculean task that required more than just a sword and shield. It took diplomacy, carrot-and-stick politics, and a bit of good old-fashioned charm qualities that Alexander possessed in spades. From Issus, Alexander's campaign continued with the siege of Tyre, a coastal city that refused to roll over. The siege lasted 7 brutal months in 32 BCE, with Alexander employing every trick in the military handbook to breach the city's formidable defences. He even built a causeway to reach the island fortress, a feat of engineering that was as audacious as it was effective. When Tyre finally fell, it was a bloody affair, with thousands killed or sold into slavery. Yet the conquest of Tyre was more than just a military triumph. It was a strategic masterstroke, securing control of the eastern Mediterranean and cutting off Persian naval routes. As Alexander's campaign continued, so did the myths. Stories of his exploits spread, painting him as a hero of almost mythical proportions. Yet, beneath the legends lay the gritty truth of war, a reality marked by harsh conditions, logistical headaches, and the relentless march of an army that consumed everything in its path. It was a reality far removed from the romanticized tales of chivalry and honor, a saga of survival and strategy that required not just courage, but an iron will and a king's cunning. And so, Alexander the Great marched on, not just a conqueror, but a man on a mission to etch his name into eternity. His story, a blend of myth and reality, continues to captivate, a testament to the enduring allure of ambition and the price of power. Stay tuned, because the tale of Alexander is far from over, with more twists and turns than a Macedonian mountain pass. And just like that, Alexander's journey takes a sharp turn from the battlefield to the boardroom, if you will. Imagine this. You've just conquered vast swathes of land, your enemies are either cowering or conquered, and you've got more territory than a monopoly board. What now? Well, for our Macedonian wonderkind, it wasn't just about planting a flag and moving on. Nope. Alexander had grand ideas about governance and cultural integration, a kind of ancient version of how to win friends and influence people, minus the PowerPoint presentations. Enter the city of Alexandria, one of over 20 cities he founded, but by far the most famous. Established in 33-1 BCE in Egypt, Alexandria wasn't just a dot on the map, it was a bold statement. Picture a gleaming metropolis with libraries, academies, and a lighthouse so impressive it made other lighthouses feel like nightlights. This wasn't just urban planning, it was a declaration of cultural ambition. Alexander envisioned Alexandria as a melting pot, a place where Greek and Eastern cultures could blend like a historical smoothie. The city's library, once the largest in the world, was a symbol of this knowledge exchange, until it wasn't, thanks to a few unfortunate fires and conquests. But here's where the plot thickens. While the image of Alexander as a benevolent ruler spreading Hellenistic culture sounds like a page out of a PR textbook, reality tells a slightly different story. The man was a master of optics, sure, but he was also as ruthless as a tax collector during an audit. Take his policy of fusion, for example. It sounds inclusive, but it often boiled down to marrying his officers off to local women and expecting them to get with the program. You could say he was an early advocate of arranged marriages, though perhaps not quite in the spirit of marital bliss. Now, let's not gloss over the administrative nightmare that is managing an empire spread over 2 million square miles, stretching from Greece to Egypt and into the heart of Asia. It wasn't all glory in games. It was a Herculean task of logistics, diplomacy, and occasionally brute force. Alexander was busy micromanaging like a boss, appointing satraps, regional governors, to keep an eye on things. But these weren't just any pencil pushers. They were often locals, a strategic move to placate conquered peoples and maintain some semblance of order. Yet for all his genius, Alexander's policy sometimes had all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop. His attempts at blending cultures weren't always met with applause. His Macedonian troops, hardened warriors used to a certain way of life, weren't too thrilled about adopting foreign customs, or worse, seeing their leader adopting them. The infamous mutiny at Opus in 324 BCE is a testament to this friction. When Alexander tried to send veteran soldiers home, they revolted, feeling underappreciated and discarded. This wasn't just a hiccup, it was a full-blown crisis of confidence. And let's talk about the cost of running this mega empire. The financial demands were mind-boggling. Alexander wasn't just juggling the costs of war, he was funding monumental projects, paying his army, and maintaining a court that would make any modern celebrity blush. His treasury, though flush with Persian gold, was under constant strain. Let's just say Alexander's fiscal policy would have given any accountant sleepless nights. The myth of Alexander's benevolence often glosses over these gritty realities. Sure, he was a visionary, but he was also a man who could be as hard as the marble statues that would later depict him. His execution of Philotas and the murder of Parmenion, two of his trusted generals, was a cold reminder that Alexander ruled with an iron fist when he deemed necessary. Philotas was accused of conspiracy, a charge that led to a swift and brutal execution, while Parmenion, his father, was killed as a precaution. This wasn't just power politics, it was a stark message that loyalty was paramount and expendable. In the end, Alexander's empire was a patchwork quilt of cultures, stitched together by a man who was part visionary, part tyrant. His attempts at cultural integration were groundbreaking, but fraught with tension and resistance. The legend of Alexander as the great unifier is as compelling as it is complex. But behind the stories of heroic conquest lies a tale of a leader grappling with the monumental task of ruling a world far larger than his dreams. And so, the tale of Alexander the Great continues, a blend of myth and reality, ambition and ruthlessness. As we move forward, the story only gets more intricate, with challenges that would test even the most seasoned of rulers. Stay tuned, because Alexander's saga is far from done, with more chapters of intrigue, power, and legacy awaiting. And with the flick of a quill, we dive back into the whirlwind life of Alexander the Great, the man whose temper could rival a volcano and whose charisma made him a living legend. You see, Alexander wasn't just a military genius, he was a walking paradox. His personality was as complex as a Byzantine mosaic, full of contradictions that would make any psychologist's head spin. Let's start with his infamous temper, a trait that could turn a dinner party into a diplomatic incident faster than you can say, "pass the wine." Alexander's temper tantrums were legendary. We're talking about a guy who once killed Clytus the Black, a close friend and officer, in a drunken rage during a banquet in 3028 BCE. That's right, Alexander could go from cheers to jeers quicker than a bad stand-up comedian. This wasn't just a case of too much wine and loose lips, it was a brutal reminder that even the closest of friends could become collateral damage in his fiery outbursts. The incident left Alexander in deep remorse-proof that even a conqueror could be haunted by his own demons. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. Alexander's relationships with his companions paint a picture of a man who inspired loyalty bordering on fanaticism. Take Hephaestion, for instance, Alexander's closest companion and perhaps his soulmate. The bond between these two was so strong that when Hephaestion died in 324 BCE, Alexander reportedly wept for days, commissioning a funeral that cost a staggering 10,000 talents, a sum that could finance a small war. This wasn't just grief. It was a display of loyalty and love that transcended the battlefield. Yet, Alexander's relationships were as much about politics as they were about camaraderie. His inner circle was a web of alliances and rivalries, where friendship and enmity often walked hand in hand. This was a world where trust was a rare commodity and betrayal could lurk behind any smile. Alexander knew this all too well, and his strategic acumen extended to his personal life. His marriage to Roxana, a Bactrian princess, was less about romance and more about securing his rule in Central Asia. A sweet gesture? Perhaps, but also a shrewd political move wrapped in matrimonial bliss. Now, let's not forget the elephant in the room, Alexander's rumoured divinity. The man himself didn't shy away from the notion that he was more than just a mortal. He was said to be the son of Zeus, a claim that probably did wonders for his ego, if not his humility. This divine PR campaign wasn't just about self-aggrandizement, it was a strategic play to solidify his authority across a diverse empire. After all, who wouldn't bow to a god-king? But while the idea of divinity might have impressed some, it also sowed seeds of discontent among his Macedonian troops, who preferred their king to be of flesh and blood, not myth and legend. The contradictions in Alexander's character are as fascinating as they are frustrating. Ancient sources paint him as a hero and a tyrant, a visionary and a despot. Take his treatment of Thebes, which he razed to the ground, versus his founding of Alexandria, a beacon of culture and learning. It's like watching a Shakespearean play, where the hero's virtues are inseparable from his flaws. Alexander's strategic brilliance was matched only by his ability to alienate those closest to him, leaving a legacy as precarious as a house of cards. But how did these personal dynamics influence his strategic decisions? Well, for starters, his belief in his own divinity may have fueled his relentless drive for conquest, propelling him to push the boundaries of his empire ever further. His relationships, fraught with loyalty and betrayal, shaped his leadership style, one that balanced carrot and stick diplomacy with an iron fist. Alexander wasn't just a military tactician, he was a master of human psychology, understanding that an empire wasn't just built on stone and steel, but also on hearts and minds. The economic realities of his empire were as daunting as its political landscape. The cost of maintaining his sprawling dominion was astronomical, with the treasury constantly teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. Alexander's campaigns weren't just about glory. They were about filling the coffers with the spoils of war. Yet, for all his financial acumen, Alexander's generosity often bordered on the reckless. He was known to give away vast sums of money, rewarding loyalty, but also risking fiscal stability. It was a high-stakes game of empire building, where the line between fortune and folly was razor-thin. As we unravel the complexities of Alexander's life, it's clear that his story is as much about personal triumphs and tragedies as it is about military conquests. The contradictions in his character, the tensions in his relationships, and the burdens of leadership paint a portrait of a man who was larger than life, yet all too human. His legacy, a tapestry of myth and reality, continues to captivate, inviting us to ponder the enigmatic figure who dared to dream of a world united under his rule. So, as we march forward in this tale of ambition and power, remember that Alexander's saga is far from over. The next chapter promises more intrigue, more drama, and more insights into the man who sought to conquer not just lands, but the very essence of what it means to be great. Stay tuned, because the journey is just getting started. As we march forward in this tale of ambition and power, remember that Alexander's saga is far from over. The next chapter promises more intrigue, more drama, and more insights into the man who sought to conquer not just lands, but the very essence of what it means to be great. Stay tuned, because the journey is just getting started. But every journey, no matter how epic, must come to an end. For Alexander, that end came sooner than anyone expected, and it was as dramatic and mysterious as his life. Picture the scene: Babylon, 33 BCE. Alexander, the conqueror of worlds, was struck down not by a sword or spear but by a fever. a cruel twist of fate for a man who had faced down entire armies. Theories abound about what really did him in. Was it malaria, typhoid, or perhaps poison? The truth is as elusive as a Macedonian phalanx in retreat, and we'll probably never know for sure. But what we do know is that at the age of just 32, Alexander was gone, leaving behind an empire as fragmented as a Greek vase after a particularly rowdy symposium. Now, here's where the chaos kicks in. Alexander's empire, a sprawling patchwork quilt of territory stretching from Greece to India, was held together by his sheer force of will and a bit of fear-driven loyalty. With him gone, his generals, known as the Diadochi, were like kids let loose in a candy store, each grabbing for the juiciest pieces of territory. Picture a high-stakes game of Risk, but with real armies and actual bloodshed. The empire was carved up like a holiday turkey, but without the festive spirit. This fracturing wasn't just about power grabs, it was a testament to the complexities of maintaining such a vast dominion. Alexander's strategy of cultural fusion, while visionary, was a double-edged sword. It fostered resentment among his Macedonian troops and suspicion among the conquered peoples. Without Alexander's charismatic leadership to smooth over these tensions, the cracks began to show. The unity he had enforced was more of a patchwork piece than a solid foundation, and it crumbled like a poorly built sandcastle under the weight of competing ambitions. And so, the myth versus the man debate kicks into high gear. Alexander the Great, the demigod conqueror, was also Alexander the human, with flaws as grand as his victories. His untimely death left a legacy that's as much about what he didn't achieve as what he did. Sure, he conquered vast lands, but he left no clear succession plan, no blueprint for governance. His empire was a colossal experiment in cultural integration, but it lacked the institutional framework to endure. It's like building a castle out of playing cards, impressive, but not built to last. Yet, despite this fragmentation, Alexander's story continues to fascinate. Why? Perhaps it's the audacity of his vision, the sheer scale of his ambition. Or maybe it's the romantic notion of a young king who dared to dream beyond the horizon. The myths and legends surrounding him have taken on a life of their own, transforming him into a figure who transcends time. He's become a symbol of youthful ambition and the tragic price of greatness, a narrative catnip for storytellers across the ages. Now, let's have some fun and imagine Alexander in the realm of modern pop culture. Picture him as a charismatic anti-hero in a binge-worthy Netflix series, complete with dramatic battles, political intrigue, and a touch of romance. Or perhaps he'd fit right in as a rock star, playing to sold-out arenas with a legion of adoring fans. His life, after all, had all the elements of a blockbuster: glory, betrayal, and a tragic end. The man was a walking legend, the kind of figure who could sell out theatres faster than you can say ancient world tour. In the end, Alexander's story is a kaleidoscope of contradictions. He's the conqueror who couldn't conquer time, the visionary whose dreams outpaced reality. His empire may have crumbled, but his legend endures, a testament to the enduring allure of ambition and the complexities of leadership. The lesson here is as timeless as it is poignant. Greatness comes at a cost, and even the mightiest fall. In Alexander's case, the fall was swift, but the echoes of his legacy still resonate today, a reminder of the thin line between myth and reality. So, as we wrap up this saga, let's raise a metaphorical glass to Alexander the Great, a man whose life was a mosaic of triumphs and tragedies, whose legacy is as complex as the history he helped shape. His story, a blend of myth and reality, continues to captivate and inspire, a testament to the enduring power of ambition and the human spirit. Here's to Alexander, a legend for the ages, and a reminder that history is as much about the stories we tell as the facts we uncover. Cheers to the journey and to the stories yet to be told. The Austronesians had a flair for the dramatic. Picture this: it's around 3000 BCE, and a group of people from what we now call Taiwan decide that land is overrated. Instead, they look out at the endless, unpredictable ocean and think, yeah, let's do that. Armed with nothing but sheer nerve and some surprisingly sophisticated canoes, these early navigators sparked an epic saga of exploration that would span from the beaches of Madagascar to the islands of Hawaii. Frankly, It's a wonder they didn't just sit down and invent landlocked hobbies instead. These folks weren't just content to paddle around their backyard. Nope, they had bigger fish to fry, or perhaps more islands to find. They embarked on voyages that would make any modern-day cruise seem like a leisurely paddle in a kiddie pool. And why not? With no GPS, no coast guards, and certainly no in-flight movies, the Austronesians made it look like a walk in the park, or a paddle in the ocean to be precise. Now, let's chat numbers. The Austronesian expansion was one of the greatest migrations in human history, and it all kicked off around 3000 BCE. By 500 CE, they'd covered a whopping 60 million square kilometers of ocean. That's like traveling from the moon and back about 78 times. And they did it all without the help of Google Maps. These seafarers eventually settled on islands stretching from Taiwan to Madagascar, and everywhere in between, including the Philippines, Indonesia, and even the far-flung reaches of New Zealand. But what possessed them to take to the seas in the first place? It wasn't exactly a walk to the corner store. Well, it seems necessity was the mother of this maritime invention. Taiwan was getting a bit overcrowded, and the allure of unclaimed land, along with the potential for better fishing and farming opportunities, was too tempting to resist. Plus, let's be honest, when your neighbour's hut is just a little too close for comfort, the open sea starts looking pretty appealing. The Austronesians were nothing if not resourceful. Their double-hulled canoes, the ancient equivalent of a sturdy SUV, were technological masterpieces of their time. These vessels could withstand the rough and tumble of the open ocean, thanks to their ingenious design which provided stability and speed. When you're crossing thousands of kilometers of unpredictable ocean, you want something that won't tip over at the first wave. These canoes were the ultimate in ancient reliability, though, regrettably, they didn't come with cup holders. And let's not forget about their navigational skills. Without a compass, these sailors relied on the stars, the sun, and even the flight patterns of birds to find their way. Essentially, they were the original GPS. Just imagine setting sail with nothing but a keen eye and a good sense of direction. It's like trying to find your way across town using only the position of the sun and a vague sense of optimism. Of course, the romantic notion of setting off into the unknown is all well and good, but the reality was a bit grimmer. Sea travel in a canoe wasn't exactly a pleasure cruise. There were storms, sharks, and the ever-present danger of running out of food or water. Yet despite these challenges, the Austronesians pressed on, driven by the promise of new lands and opportunities, a testament to the human spirit's unshakable resolve and occasional lapse in judgment. In their wake, they left a legacy of cultural exchange and genetic mixing that would forever shape the regions they touched. From the languages spoken to the crops grown, Austronesian influence is still felt today. Theirs was not just a journey of discovery, but a profound reshaping of the human landscape across the Pacific and Indian Oceans. They were the original influencers, long before the days of social media. So, the next time you hear the phrase, taking the road less travelled, remember the Austronesians, who didn't just take the road less travelled, they took the ocean nobody thought was passable. With nothing more than determination and a canoe, they set sail into the unknown, leaving a wake of history that still ripples through time. But let's pump the brakes on this runaway canoe ride of romanticism and splash some cold, salty reality into the narrative. The image of the Austronesians as noble explorers driven only by the spirit of adventure needs a good old-fashioned reality check. Sure, they were pioneers of the ocean, but they were also human, with all the messy motivations and practical needs that entails. These weren't just peaceful voyages on a lifelong holiday. No, these folks were out for survival, economic opportunity, and sometimes just plain necessity. The truth is, the Austronesians were more like the ancient world's savvy entrepreneurs than a bunch of starry-eyed wanderers. Imagine them as the original business casuals, trading in coconuts instead of PowerPoint slides. Their voyages weren't mere joyrides, they were calculated ventures with the potential for high risk and higher reward. And when we say risk, we mean the real, gritty kind involving unpredictable storms and the occasional run-in with less-than-friendly locals, not a bad quarterly report. Now, let's talk about the economics. These journeys weren't financed by the dreams of a better tomorrow, but by the hard reality of today's demands. The Austronesians capitalized on their geographic advantage, transforming the vast Pacific into a bustling trade network. Think of it as the ancient world's most extensive supply chain, where everything from obsidian to pigs could be traded. Their canoes were floating supermarkets with sails. They saw opportunity in the sea lanes, selling and bartering goods that were the ancient equivalent of hot commodities. Consider the Lapita culture, which spread pottery styles from New Guinea to Tonga. These folks were the artistic influences of their day, setting trends that spanned thousands of kilometers. The Austronesians understood that trade was a two-way street, or perhaps a two-way current. They didn't just take goods to new lands, they brought back valuable resources that their home islands lacked. They were the original import-export mavens, long before the invention of the shipping container or the headache of customs paperwork. But let's not sugarcoat it. These voyages had their costs, both in terms of resources and human life. Outfitting a canoe for a long journey wasn't cheap. You needed food, water, and enough supplies to last the trip, not to mention the skilled crew to man the ship. It was like planning a cross-country road trip without a credit card or roadside assistance. And then there was the social hierarchy that made it all possible. Not everyone got to be the captain. Someone had to do the rowing after all. These expeditions required organization and discipline with a clear chain of command. The Austronesians were navigating not just the seas, but also the social structures that allowed them to embark on such daring exploits. Chiefs and elites likely decided the who, what, and where of each expedition, wielding power over the lower classes who did the heavy lifting, or paddling, as it were. These weren't democratic cruises. They were more like military operations, with a dash of merchant marine. In the end, the Austronesian expansion was as much about economics and survival as it was about exploration. They weren't just discovering new lands, they were actively shaping the human geography of the Pacific through trade and settlement. The romantic vision of peaceful explorers setting out to conquer the unknown is nice for a bedtime story, but the reality was a bit more transactional. They were the merchants of the ocean, combining entrepreneurial spirit with a healthy dose of pragmatism. And just like today's shipping magnates, they knew the value of a good trade route. They understood that the sea was both a barrier and a highway, connecting disparate islands into a network that spanned half the globe. They were the masters of their domain, turning the vast emptiness of the ocean into a bustling crossroads of human activity. So, while it's tempting to view these ancient mariners as serene voyagers propelled by wanderlust, let's not forget the grit behind the glory. The Austronesians were pragmatic adventurers, blending the romance of exploration with the realities of economics and social structure. They were not just voyagers, but visionaries, navigating both the waves and the complex currents of human society. And in doing so, they left a legacy that continues to ripple through history, reminding us that even the grandest journeys are often driven by the everyday needs of survival and trade. And speaking of navigating complex currents, let's delve into the Austronesians' technological wizardry and navigational brilliance that made their oceanic escapades possible. These folks were the MacGyvers of the maritime world, transforming what could have been a series of disastrous misadventures into a symphony of seafaring success. We're talking about outrigger canoes and stellar navigation here, not some mystical sixth sense or ancient sea magic, though the myths sure make it sound like they had Poseidon on speed dial. First up, let's chat about those canoes. The Austronesians didn't just slap together a couple of tree trunks and hope for the best. No, they engineered outrigger canoes that were the envy of the ancient world. Think of them as the OGs of ocean-crossing vessels. These babies were designed with precision, a main hull for buoyancy, an outrigger for stability, and a sail that would make even the most jaded sailor nod in approval. This wasn't just wood and rope, this was ancient aerodynamics at work. With their sleek design, these canoes could slice through water with the grace of a dolphin dodging a tuna net. But why the outrigger, you ask? Simple. It's all about balance. Imagine trying to navigate the Pacific on a wobbly log. You'd spend more time swimming than sailing. The outrigger provided a counterbalance, keeping the canoe steady even when the ocean decided to throw a tantrum. It was like having training wheels on a bicycle, except these wheels were the difference between reaching a new island or becoming fish food. Now, onto the real showstopper, celestial navigation. The Austronesians were the original star trekkers, using the night sky as their compass long before the invention of the sextant or the GPS app that leads you into a lake. They relied on the stars, the sun, and even the ocean swells to chart their course across thousands of kilometers of open water. This wasn't just guesswork, It was a finely tuned craft honed over generations. Consider this. The average Austronesian navigator was like a walking, talking astronomical almanac. They knew that when the Southern Cross was low in the sky, they were heading north. Orion's belt? A reliable guide to the east. And let's not forget the sun, that big ball of fire that not only provided warmth, but also a pretty accurate east-west line during the day. Now, here's where it gets really clever. The Austronesians didn't just look at the stars, they listened to them. Okay, not literally, but they used the ocean currents and the flight paths of birds to confirm their celestial bearings. Birds like the frigate bird, which never strayed too far from land, were like avian GPS satellites guiding them to nearby islands. It was a symphony of sky and sea, orchestrated by navigators who could have easily doubled as meteorologists. But let's pump the brakes on the Romanticism Express. While it's tempting to picture these navigators as mystical sea sages, the reality was a bit more grounded, literally. Their knowledge came from centuries of trial and error, passed down through oral tradition and hands-on training. It wasn't the work of a lone genius, but a community effort, a testament to the collective wisdom of a culture that lived and breathed the ocean. And let's get real about the stakes. While today we might curse our phones for losing signal, for the Austronesians, a navigational error could mean the difference between discovering a fertile island and meeting a watery end. These voyages were high-risk, high-reward ventures, with the navigators bearing the ultimate responsibility. They weren't just guiding canoes, they were steering the future of their communities. So, what about the myths? The stories of navigators with supernatural abilities are certainly alluring, but they gloss over the grit and grind that went into each journey. It's the same appeal we find in tales of tech geniuses who just knew their inventions would change the world, conveniently ignoring the countless hours of hard work and failure along the way. The Austronesians were no different. Their legendary status is built on a foundation of sweat, skill, and more than a little sea salt. Yet here we are, centuries later, still in awe of their achievements. And rightly so. They turned the vast, terrifying emptiness of the ocean into a bustling network of trade and culture, connecting distant shores with a sophistication that was millennia ahead of its time. They didn't just survive the sea, they thrived on it, proving that human ingenuity knows no bounds or borders. So, next time you find yourself cursing out your GPS for leading you into a cul-de-sac, spare a thought for the Austronesian navigators. They traversed a world without maps or technology, relying on nothing more than the stars above and the waves below. It's a humbling reminder that sometimes, even in our tech-saturated age, the simplest solutions are still the most effective. And who knows, maybe there's a lesson to be learned from their blend of tradition and innovation, a balance we seem to lose when our phones run out of battery. As we continue to explore the Austronesians' legacy, let's not forget the very real, very human elements that made their journeys possible. Theirs was a story of survival, ingenuity, and an insatiable curiosity about the world around them. They were pioneers not just of the ocean, but of the human spirit, a spirit that refuses to be confined by the horizon. And as we sail forward, there's plenty more to uncover about how these ancient mariners charted their course across the world's largest ocean, leaving a legacy that continues to ripple through history. And speaking of the Austronesian spirit that refuses to be confined by the horizon, let's dive into the cultural and political undercurrents that fueled their expansive maritime routes. Picture a world where language is your passport and pottery is your calling card. Welcome to the Lapita Cultural Complex, where a shared style of intricately decorated pottery became the Instagram of the ancient world, spreading across the Pacific faster than you can say viral. Now, before we get too carried away with the romance of it all, let's put on our reality glasses. The Lapita weren't just gallivanting about, exchanging ceramic tips for fun. This was cultural exchange with a purpose. Their pottery, found from New Guinea to Samoa, wasn't just for show, it was the mark of a vast network of trade and communication. Think of it as the ancient version of a branded logo, signaling that you were part of the Lapita Club, an exclusive membership that came with perks like access to new lands, resources, and social ties. But why pottery, you ask? Well, besides being handy for storing food and water, it was also a tangible marker of identity. The intricate designs etched into these pots were more than pretty patterns. They were a language in themselves, a visual dialect that spoke of shared ancestry and common goals. In a world where the sea was as much a barrier as a bridge, these pots were the LinkedIn profiles of their time, connecting far-flung communities in a web of kinship and cooperation. And let's not overlook the linguistic tapestry woven by the Austronesians. Their language tree is the stuff of linguistic legend, branching out into over 1,000 languages spoken today across the Pacific and Indian Oceans. This wasn't just a case of, I say tomato, you say tomato. We're talking about a linguistic spread that rivals the most ambitious language apps of today. From Hawaii's aloha to Madagascar's salama, the echoes of Austronesian tongues still resonate across a third of the planet. But let's not get too starry-eyed about this linguistic legacy. The spread of language was as much about power and politics as it was about poetry. As Austronesian communities expanded, they brought their languages with them, assimilating or displacing local dialects in a process that was less about kumbaya and more about who had the bigger canoe. These were not the gentle exchanges of a linguistic fair trade agreement, but the often harsh realities of cultural dominance and adaptation. And speaking of power dynamics, let's talk political alliances. If you think modern-day bureaucracy is a tangled web, the Austronesians had their own complex systems of governance that would make today's office politics look like a Sunday picnic. Chiefs and tribal leaders wielded power over vast networks, making decisions that affected everything from trade routes to marriage alliances. These weren't just ceremonial figureheads, they were the CEOs of their communities, managing resources and people with a keen eye for both opportunity and threat. Navigating these political waters was no small feat. Alliances were as fluid as the ocean currents, shifting with the tides of trade and the winds of warfare. One day you might be trading peacefully with your neighbour, the next you could be embroiled in a skirmish over fishing rights. It was a delicate dance of diplomacy and strategy, where one wrong move could see you washed up on the shores of obscurity. But let's not forget the unexpected impacts of these maritime routes on global history. The Austronesians didn't just leave a trail of pottery shards and linguistic footprints. They laid the groundwork for a global network of trade and cultural exchange that would echo through the centuries. Their voyages set the stage for later explorations, laying down the invisible lines that would guide future mariners in their quests for new worlds and new wealth. In a way, the Austronesians were the original globalizers, connecting distant lands long before the word had even been coined. They turned the vastness of the ocean into a highway, linking islands and continents in a web of trade and culture that stretched from Southeast Asia to the far reaches of Polynesia. It was a feat of navigation and negotiation that foreshadowed the interconnected world we live in today. So, as we sail forward in this tale of intrepid explorers and savvy traders, let's keep in mind the delicate balance of romance and reality that defines their legacy. The Austronesians were not just dreamers, but doers, navigating the complex currents of culture, politics, and economics with a skill that still leaves us in awe. Their story is a testament to the human spirit's capacity for innovation and adaptation, a reminder that even in the face of daunting challenges, we can chart a course toward new horizons. And as we delve deeper into their world, there's plenty more to uncover about how these ancient mariners shaped the course of history, leaving a legacy that continues to ripple through time. And as we delve deeper into their world, there's plenty more to uncover about how these ancient mariners shaped the course of history, leaving a legacy that continues to ripple through time. It's almost as if they left behind invisible threads, sewing together a tapestry that would eventually become the diverse cultural and economic landscape we navigate today. Their influence is like the salt in the sea, ubiquitous, yet often unnoticed unless you take a closer look. So, what's the modern-day echo of these ancient maritime adventures? For starters, let's talk economics. Remember those trade routes the Austronesians established? Well, they laid the groundwork for what would eventually morph into some of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. Today, over 90% of global trade is transported by sea, and while modern container ships are a far cry from outrigger canoes, the principle remains the same. The ocean is a highway, not a barrier. The maritime networks established by the Austronesians were the prehistoric version of globalization, showing that even in the absence of fancy technology, people had a knack for connecting the dots, or in this case, the islands. And then there's the cultural fusion. The Austronesians didn't just transport goods, they carried stories, ideas, languages, and even genetic material across vast distances. Today, You can see their legacy in the cultural and linguistic diversity of regions like Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. Ever notice how some words in Malagasy sound eerily similar to ones in Indonesian? You can thank the Austronesians for that linguistic link. They were the original cultural ambassadors, long before the dawn of Instagram influencers and TikTok trendsetters. Now, let's pivot to the political stage. The Austronesians' voyages weren't just about discovering new lands. They were about forging alliances, establishing dominance, and sometimes, let's face it, stirring up a bit of trouble. These were the ancient world's political chess players, moving their pieces across the oceanic board with strategic precision. Today, the remnants of their political maneuvering can be seen in the complex web of island nations and territories that pepper the Pacific. It's a reminder that politics and the sea have always been entangled in the dance as old as time. But what can modern societies glean from these ancient oceanic odysseys? For one, the Austronesians taught us the importance of adaptability. They thrived by bending to the whims of the wind and waves, a lesson in flexibility that's just as relevant in today's fast-paced, ever-changing world. Their ability to navigate uncertainty with skill and ingenuity is something contemporary leaders could certainly take a page from, especially when the seas of modern life get choppy. And speaking of navigation, their reliance on the stars and natural cues is a humbling reminder of the importance of staying connected to the world around us. In an era where we sometimes struggle to find our way to the nearest coffee shop without a smartphone, the Austronesians remind us of the value in trusting our instincts and the natural world. Perhaps there's a lesson there about the balance between technology and intuition, something worth pondering the next time your GPS loses signal. Now, as we wrap up this tale of ancient mariners, let's indulge in a bit of imaginative speculation. What would those Austronesian sailors think if they could hop on a modern cruise liner? Picture them strolling the decks of a floating palace, complete with all-you-can-eat buffets and shuffleboard courts. They'd probably be floored by the sheer size of these modern behemoths, not to mention their ability to sail across the ocean without a single paddle in sight. And the cabins! For folks who were used to sleeping under the stars or in makeshift huts, a room with a bed and a bathroom would seem like the height of luxury. But beyond the creature comforts, they might marvel at how far their legacy has sailed. The same ocean they once feared and revered is now crisscrossed by vessels of all shapes and sizes, carrying goods and people from every corner of the globe. In a way, the modern cruise ship is the ultimate testament to their vision of a connected world, a floating symbol of how far we've come and how much we owe to those who dared to set sail into the unknown. So, as we disembark from this journey through time, let's tip our hats to the Austronesians and their audacious spirit. They were the trailblazers of the tides, the unsung heroes of the high seas, whose legacy continues to wash up on the shores of our modern world. They remind us that even the grandest voyages begin with a single paddle stroke, and that the horizon is just the beginning, not the end. As we chart our own courses through the complex waters of contemporary life, we might do well to remember their blend of courage, curiosity, and a dash of audacity, a recipe for adventure that never goes out of style. Florence in the late 14th century was a place where artists were like rock stars, but minus the groupies and with a lot more marble dust. Amidst this creative mayhem, a young Filippo Brunelleschi was born in 1377 into a world where the Medici family was busy counting their coins and plotting their next political move, and the air was thick with the aroma of both ambition and pestilence, the latter thanks to the Black Death still lurking around. Filippo's early life was as colourful as one might expect from a lad growing up in a city that was the Renaissance's cradle, a place where even the cobblestones seemed to encourage artistic expression. Filippo wasn't initially aimed at the heavens of architectural fame. Nope, his first love was actually goldsmithing. Picture a geeky teen in a workshop, trying not to blow himself up while experimenting with molten metal. His father, a notary named Brunelleschi di Lippo, perhaps had other aspirations for his son, like, staying alive and not burning the family house down. In a city like Florence, where every corner had a statue and every artist was looking to outdo the last, young Filippo was learning the ropes, or rather the gold wires, under the guidance of various master goldsmiths. It was a practical trade, one that could pay the bills, assuming you didn't melt your profits away. But why goldsmithing? Well, it was a family-friendly business, and most importantly, it was respectable. Plus, being a goldsmith in Florence was like being a tech startup guru in Silicon Valley today. If you played your cards or your hammers right, you could make a pretty penny. Brunelleschi's early works and experiments in metalwork were a kind of precursor to his architectural feats. After all, who wouldn't want a cathedral designed by someone who knows their way around a forge? Despite his talent, Filippo's first brush with design competition did not end in glory. In 1401, he entered a famed competition to design new bronze doors for the Florence Baptistery, a gig that promised both fame and fortune. Think of it as the Renaissance equivalent of a high-stakes reality TV show, but with more chisels and fewer commercial breaks. The competition was fierce, and Filippo was up against other big names of the time, including the young and equally ambitious Lorenzo Ghiberti. Now, the task was to create a bronze panel depicting the sacrifice of Isaac. Judges wanted something that would leave a lasting impression, not just a quick meh and a shrug. Filippo, with his flair for the dramatic, delivered a piece that was bold and dynamic. But here's where things took a turn. His design was considered too avant-garde, too out there for the judges' tastes. In a twist of irony, Ghiberti's design, which was more conventional and less expensive to produce, won the day. In essence, Filippo learned an early lesson in the brutal politics of art. Sometimes, playing it safe pays the bills. Rather than sulking in the corner and cursing the art gods, Filippo took this defeat as a cue to pivot. But not before reportedly engaging in a bit of rivalry with Ghiberti that would make today's reality TV producers green with envy. Rumour has it, the two never quite saw eye to eye after that, a rivalry that was as famous as it was petty. But let's not pretend that losing the contest was all bad. In fact, it served as a crucial turning point. Filippo started thinking beyond bronze panels, towards something grander, a little thing called architecture. But how did a goldsmith come designer suddenly decide to build cathedrals? The truth is, the transition wasn't exactly overnight. It was more like a slow burn, helped along by a hefty dose of Florentine civic pride and a healthy rivalry with Ghiberti. Florence was in the midst of a building boom, the kind that makes real estate agents salivate. The crown jewel of this boom was the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, a project that had been dragging on for over a century, like a city council project gone awry. The cathedral's massive dome was still missing, an embarrassing bald spot on the city's architectural scalp. With the baptistery competition loss simmering in his rear view, Filippo's interest in architecture grew. He began studying ancient Roman ruins and engineering, absorbing everything he could from the dusty remains of Roman ingenuity. Here's a guy who took, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, very literally, except he was doing it in Florence, without the benefit of Google or Wikipedia. His study of the Romans wasn't just academic, it was an obsession. He measured, he sketched, and he probably annoyed a few locals while prying into every crevice of the ancient structures he could find. By 1409, Filippo was ready to tackle something that would make his former bronze door plans look like child's play. He returned to Florence with newfound knowledge and an eye for the monumental. It was time to put his plans into action, and Florence was the perfect stage for his ambitious designs. The city was a tapestry of opportunity, a place where innovation was as much a part of daily life as the endless cups of espresso that fueled its residents. Florence was not just a city, it was a living, breathing entity, pulsating with the energy of its citizens. It was a place where politics and art were as intertwined as a Renaissance double helix. The Medici family, Florence's unofficial rulers, were keen on making their city the envy of Europe. They understood that art and architecture were not just about aesthetics, but were powerful tools of influence and prestige. In such an environment, a young visionary like Brunelleschi was bound to either flourish or fade into obscurity. Filippo's path to architecture wasn't a straight line. Nope, it was more like a zigzag through the minefield of Florentine society. But he was nothing if not persistent. He knew that to make a name for himself, he needed to create something that would not just stand the test of time, but redefine the very skyline of the city. The dome of Santa Maria del Fiore was that opportunity. It was a looming challenge, one that had stumped architects for decades. The cathedral itself was a masterpiece in progress, but the dome, oh, that dome was the Rubik's Cube of its time. No one knew how to build it without the whole thing coming down in a rather expensive heap of rubble. This was the challenge that called to Filippo. Others might have seen an insurmountable problem, but Filippo saw a chance to leave a legacy. He wasn't just thinking of a dome, he was envisioning an architectural revolution. It was a bold dream, one that would require not just skill and knowledge, but a touch of madness, the kind that only true visionaries possess. And with a city like Florence as his canvas, there was no telling what Brunelleschi would attempt next. Enter the stage, Filippo Brunelleschi, with a daring plan that would make even the boldest Renaissance man wonder if someone had spiked his vino. The Florence Cathedral dome was the architectural equivalent of a locked treasure chest, and everyone in Florence was fumbling for the key. The cathedral itself was a majestic giant, resting in the heart of Florence with a gaping wound where its dome should be. For over a century, architects had been scratching their heads, much like a bunch of cats trying to solve a Rubik's Cube. Enter Filippo, with a twinkle in his eye and a cracked egg in hand. Now, the dome was no ordinary architectural feat. You see, the problem was its size, a massive 150 feet across. The good folks of Florence wanted a dome that would outshine anything in Europe. But there was a teensy problem. No one knew how to build it without a forest of scaffolding, which, let's be honest, was more of a logistical nightmare than a solution. It was like trying to build a spaceship with IKEA instructions, hopelessly baffling. But not for Filippo. He had been studying the Pantheon in Rome, and he saw a way to construct the dome without the whole thing collapsing like a poorly baked soufflé. What Brunelleschi proposed was nothing short of audacious. His plan was to construct the dome using a double-shell structure with an inner and outer layer working in harmony, like a Renaissance duet. The inner shell would be constructed with a herringbone pattern of bricks, an ancient Roman technique that was as effective as it was visually stunning. This pattern provided both strength and stability, creating a self-supporting structure that would, theoretically, hold itself up without the need for scaffolding. The outer shell would be more lightweight, purely decorative, and would shield the inner structure from the elements. Now, you might wonder how Brunelleschi convinced the city to trust him with this seemingly insane plan. Cue the egg. Legend has it that Filippo was asked to explain how he would construct the dome without scaffolding. Rather than diving into a technical lecture, he pulled out an egg. He challenged the doubters to make an egg stand upright on a flat surface. After everyone failed, Filippo gently tapped the egg on the table, cracking the bottom so it stood on its own. The message was clear. Sometimes it takes a little outside the box thinking, or in this case, outside the eggshell thinking. It was a clever metaphor for his approach to the dome, and it worked like a charm. Of course, the cracked egg story has all the hallmarks of a myth, but like all good myths, it captures a kernel of truth. Brunelleschi's real genius lay in his ability to see solutions where others saw insurmountable problems. His confidence, bordering on arrogance, was infectious. The city leaders, perhaps swayed by the allure of having the most impressive cathedral in Christendom, gave him the go-ahead. In 1418, he was officially appointed chief architect of the dome, even though he still had to share the title with, you guessed it, Lorenzo Ghiberti. Yes, the same Ghiberti who had bested him in the baptistry doors competition. Talk about a Renaissance plot twist. Working alongside Ghiberti was a bitter pill for Filippo to swallow. Their rivalry was legendary, a high-stakes drama filled with as much ego as engineering. But Filippo wasn't about to let professional friction derail his vision. He took charge of the construction, implementing a series of ingenious solutions to overcome the challenges of building such a massive structure. One of his most brilliant inventions was the ox hoist, a complex system of gears and pulleys that allowed heavy materials to be lifted to great heights with ease. It was like a medieval elevator, and it was an absolute game-changer. Despite the tension with Ghiberti, construction of the dome progressed at an impressive pace. Between 1420 and 1436, the dome rose skyward, brick by brick, defying not just gravity but the skeptics who had doubted Filippo's vision. The cost of this ambitious project was a staggering 40,000 florins, a sum that would make even the wealthiest Medici blanch. But for Florence, this was no mere expense. It was an investment in the city's glory, a testament to its status as the Renaissance's beating heart. As the dome took shape, it became a symbol of Florentine ingenuity and ambition, a monument to human creativity and tenacity. Brunelleschi's work on the dome was not just about solving an architectural puzzle. It was about redefining the very nature of architecture itself. He was introducing principles of engineering that were revolutionary, blending art with science in a way that had never been done before. His use of linear perspective, a technique he had pioneered, allowed him to create a sense of depth and dimension that was as much a visual feast as it was a structural necessity. It was as if he had taken a giant leap forward while everyone else was still learning to crawl. The completion of the dome was nothing short of miraculous. On August 30th, 4036, the final stone was laid, and the dome was consecrated by Pope Eugene IV. It stood as a testament to Brunelleschi's genius, a masterpiece that would inspire generations of architects and artists. Yet, the true marvel of the dome was not just its size or beauty, but its ability to stand tall against the odds. It was a triumph of human ingenuity, a reminder that with enough vision and a touch of madness, even the impossible can become reality. But here's the kicker. While the dome was a resounding success, Brunelleschi's relationship with Ghiberti remained as frosty as a Florentine winter morning. In a final act of professional one-upmanship, Filippo arranged for the completion of the lantern, the crowning feature of the dome, to be done under his sole supervision. He wasn't about to share the glory of his crowning achievement, not even with his old rival. It was a fitting end to a saga that had been as much about personal ambition as it was about architectural innovation. Brunelleschi's dome was more than just a roof over Florence's head. It was a beacon of the city's aspirations, a testament to the power of human creativity and perseverance. In the end, Filippo had not just built a dome, he had crafted a legacy that would echo through the ages. As the sun set over Florence, casting its warm glow on the terracotta tiles, the dome stood as a monument to the Renaissance spirit, a spirit that dared to dream bigger, reach further, and, most importantly, crack a few eggs along the way. As the sun set over Florence, casting its warm glow on the terracotta tiles, the dome stood as a monument to the Renaissance spirit, a spirit that dared to dream bigger, reach further, and, most importantly, crack a few eggs along the way. But let's dive a bit deeper into the nitty-gritty of how Filippo Brunelleschi pulled off this architectural miracle. This wasn't just a case of, if you build it, they will come. It was more like, if you build it, they might not laugh at you for suggesting gravity is optional. Brunelleschi's genius lay not just in his audacious vision, but in the practical, almost rebellious techniques he employed. Picture this. A dome so large that it stretched 150 feet across, a testament to ambition itself. The challenge was how to hold it all together without modern scaffolding or cranes. Brunelleschi didn't just think outside the box, he dismantled the box entirely and used the pieces to craft something new. Let's talk about the herringbone brick pattern, an ingenious innovation that was as much about aesthetics as it was about physics. By placing the bricks in a zigzag pattern, Brunelleschi effectively redirected the forces of gravity. This wasn't just artistry, it was structural wizardry. The herringbone design acted like a series of anchors, distributing the weight and ensuring that the bricks didn't shift or slide. Imagine the difference between stacking a pile of books and interlocking them like puzzle pieces. One might topple with a nudge, while the other stands firm, defying the chaos of its surroundings. Brunelleschi's approach was akin to playing a complex game of Jenga, where each brick was meticulously placed, not to ensure balance, but to create a self-supporting marvel. He was like an architectural MacGyver, using what he had to solve a problem that had stumped everyone else. But here's a fun twist. Like any good magician, Brunelleschi kept his secrets close to the vest. While he was building the dome, he was also building a legend, cloaking his methods in mystery. In fact, when it came to the construction itself, Filippo was so secretive that he refused to share his plans with anyone, not even his workers. He'd show up at the site with detailed models and sketches, but never the full blueprint. It was as if he was saying, "Trust me, I know what I'm doing," while keeping everyone else in the dark. This wasn't just about protecting his intellectual property, it was about maintaining control. He was the maestro, and the dome was his symphony. Now, let's not forget the logistics of lifting tons of brick and stone high above the streets of Florence. Enter the ox hoist, another Brunelleschi brainchild. This contraption was a marvel of engineering, a system of gears and pulleys that allowed heavy materials to be raised with remarkable efficiency. Picture a giant medieval yo-yo, if you will, except instead of string, you have ropes, and instead of a toy, you have several tons of raw material. It was a game changer, transforming what should have been an arduous task into a relatively smooth operation. This wasn't just innovation, it was a revolution. The economic context of this project was equally fascinating. At a staggering cost of 40,000 florins, the dome was a financial gamble akin to betting the house on a long shot. But for Florence, it was a necessary risk. The city was vying for dominance in the cultural and political arenas, and the dome was more than just an architectural feat. It was a statement of power. It was like having the biggest, shiniest trophy on the block, a way to show rivals that Florence wasn't just playing the game, it was rewriting the rules. Amidst all this, Brunelleschi's rivalry with Lorenzo Ghiberti simmered like a Renaissance soap opera. The two were like oil and water, constantly clashing, yet somehow forced to coexist. Brunelleschi might have had to share the title of chief architect, but make no mistake, this was his show. He was the visionary, and Ghiberti was the reluctant sidekick, a fact that surely grated on both their nerves. It was an arrangement fraught with tension, a reminder that even in the heights of artistic achievement, human egos are never far from the surface. As the dome rose, so did Brunelleschi's reputation. He was no longer just a goldsmith who dabbled in architecture, he was a master of his craft, a pioneer who blended art with science in a way that would set the stage for future generations. His use of linear perspective was not merely about creating depth, it was about altering perceptions, challenging the viewer to see the world in new ways. It was as if he had taken the Renaissance idea of human potential and turned it into a tangible reality. Of course, the story wouldn't be complete without a touch of drama. During construction, Brunelleschi fell seriously ill, leaving Ghiberti temporarily in charge. It was a power play that could have gone disastrously wrong, but instead it served to highlight Brunelleschi's indispensability. The project floundered without his genius at the helm, and when he recovered, it was clear who was truly in charge. It was a testament to his skill and vision, a reminder that while talent can be shared, brilliance often stands alone. In the end, the completion of the dome was not just a triumph of engineering, but a victory for the human spirit. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when ambition met innovation, when dreams were given form and substance. Yet, even as the final stone was laid, Brunelleschi's work was far from over. The dome was just one chapter in a larger story, a stepping stone to even greater accomplishments. As the dawn broke over Florence, the city was forever changed, its skyline dominated by a structure that defied not just gravity, but expectations. And in the heart of it all was Filippo Brunelleschi, a man whose genius was as boundless as the dome he had created. While Brunelleschi's masterpiece crowned Florence's skyline, it also set the stage for a seismic shift in Renaissance architecture. His dome wasn't just a pretty face, it was a trailblazer, an architectural influencer before Instagram was even a twinkle in the digital sphere. The impact of Brunelleschi's innovations rippled across Europe, causing quite the architectural buzz, and left his contemporaries scrambling to keep up. The dome of Santa Maria del Fiore was more than just an engineering marvel. It was a bold statement that whispered, or rather shouted, "Look what we can do." It was a beacon for architects who previously thought that building something this grand without scaffolding was just a pipe dream. Brunelleschi's double-shell structure, his clever use of the herringbone brick pattern, and his mastery of linear perspective were like architectural cheat codes that others were desperate to crack. But let's not get too carried away with the lone genius narrative. Sure, Filippo had a mind that was part magician, part engineer, but he wasn't working in a vacuum. Florence was a hotbed of creative collaboration and, let's face it, a bit of cutthroat competition. The city was a Renaissance petri dish where artists, architects and engineers cross-pollinated ideas faster than you can say Medici. Brunelleschi's work was as much a product of this vibrant environment as it was of his singular vision. Take the economic backdrop, for instance. Florence was thriving, and the Medici family was pumping money into art and architecture like it was the latest investment trend. Their patronage wasn't purely altruistic, mind you. They knew that grand buildings meant prestige, and prestige meant power. The dome, with its staggering 40,000 florin price tag, was a testament to this economic reality. It was a lavish expenditure, but also a strategic one, an investment in Florence's cultural capital. Brunelleschi's contemporaries, like Donatello and Alberti, were also pushing boundaries, and the cross-pollination of ideas was as potent as the Florentine espresso. Donatello, with his groundbreaking sculptures, was redefining what it meant to bring realism into art, while Alberti was busy penning treatises that would become the architectural Bibles of the time. They were all part of a creative ecosystem, each feeding off the other's innovations. It was like a Renaissance brainstorming session, with Brunelleschi playing the role of the maverick disruptor. And let's not forget the practicalities. Florence wasn't just a city of idealistic dreamers. It was a bustling metropolis with a booming textile trade and a population that demanded infrastructure to match its cultural ambitions. The construction of the dome wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about practicality, about creating a landmark that symbolized Florence's status as a powerhouse. The architects of the time, inspired by Brunelleschi, were tasked with balancing beauty and utility, a juggling act that required both vision and pragmatism. As if the challenge of constructing the dome wasn't enough, Brunelleschi had to navigate the murky waters of Florentine politics. The city's power dynamics were as intricate as the dome's brickwork, with the Medici family pulling strings behind the scenes. Brunelleschi had to be more than just an architect. He had to be a diplomat, a politician, and sometimes a bit of a showman. The myth of the lone genius is romantic, but the reality was far more complex. Brunelleschi's success was as much about his ability to maneuver through these societal labyrinths as it was about his architectural prowess. The legacy of Brunelleschi's dome is undeniable, but let's not forget the many unsung collaborators who played their parts. This wasn't a one-man show. From the labourers who risked life and limb to lay bricks hundreds of feet in the air, to the financiers who made sure the florins kept flowing, each played a role in bringing this vision to life. It was a team effort, a Renaissance ensemble cast with Filippo as the charismatic lead. The impact of Brunelleschi's work extended far beyond Florence. His innovations inspired a new wave of architects who saw the potential to marry form and function in ways previously unimagined. Across Europe, the seeds of the Renaissance were taking root, with cities eager to replicate Florence's architectural success. Brunelleschi's influence can be seen in the grand cathedrals of Milan and Venice, where architects took cues from his techniques and adapted them to their own contexts. It was an architectural revolution, one that would shape the skyline of Europe for centuries to come. Yet, despite his monumental achievements, Brunelleschi remained a paradoxical figure. He was both revered and resented, a genius who was as polarizing as he was brilliant. His rivalry with Ghiberti, though legendary, was just one of many relationships that were as complex as the structures he built. Brunelleschi was a master at navigating these personal and professional dynamics, using them to his advantage even as they threatened to derail his ambitions. As the Renaissance unfolded, the myth of the solitary genius persisted, but the reality was far more intricate. Brunelleschi's work was a testament to the power of collaboration, to the idea that even the most visionary ideas are often the result of collective effort. It was a reminder that while individual brilliance can spark innovation, it is the collaboration and competition between minds that truly drives progress. In the end, Brunelleschi's legacy was not just about the dome itself, but about the doors. It opened for future generations of architects and artists. His innovations challenged the status quo, setting the stage for a new era where art and science were not separate disciplines but intertwined forces that could transform the world. The Florence Cathedral dome was more than just a physical structure. It was a symbol of human potential, a beacon that illuminated the path for those who dared to dream bigger and reach further. As we move forward in this historical exploration, we'll delve deeper into the ripple effects of Brunelleschi's work, examining how his legacy continued to influence architecture and culture long after the last brick was laid. The story of Filippo Brunelleschi is one of ambition and innovation, a tale that resonates through history as a reminder of what can be achieved when vision meets determination. So stay tuned, because the Renaissance was just getting started, and there are plenty more stories to tell about the forces that shaped this remarkable era. As we move forward in this historical exploration, let's pivot from the bricks and mortar of Brunelleschi's dome to the myths swirling around the man himself. Filippo Brunelleschi was a complex character, and the stories that emerged about him are like Renaissance gossip on steroids, part truth part legend, all fascinating. Some tales were likely spun by Filippo himself, an architectural PT, Barnum who knew the value of a good story in building his brand. First up, the classic cracked egg story. It's a tale that's been told and retold, where Brunelleschi supposedly wowed the doubters with a simple egg-standing trick to demonstrate his dome-building prowess. While the egg anecdote is delightful, it's more likely a metaphorical hat tip to his knack for thinking outside the box, or in this case, the shell. The real story is that Brunelleschi's genius lay in his ability to keep his architectural cards close to his chest, revealing just enough to tantalize without giving away his trade secrets. The man was also known for his secretive nature and a penchant for drama. Historical accounts suggest that he was fiercely protective of his designs, sometimes to the point of paranoia. In one instance, it's said he pretended to be gravely ill just to see if Ghiberti, his old rival, could keep the project afloat without him. Spoiler alert, he couldn't. This little stunt not only cemented Filippo's indispensability, but also added another juicy layer to the soap opera that was his life. Now, while we're on the subject of myths, let's address the notion that Brunelleschi single-handedly revolutionized architecture. Yes, he was a visionary, but he was also part of a broader movement. The Renaissance was like the original start-up incubator, where new ideas were cross-pollinating faster than you can say Silicon Valley. Filippo wasn't working in isolation, he was marinating in a stew of innovation, surrounded by minds that were as restless as his own. The Medici family, Florence's unofficial patrons, were bankrolling artists left and right, understanding that a beautiful city was a powerful city. They didn't just see art as decoration, they saw it as a weapon of influence. Speaking of influence, let's talk about how Brunelleschi's innovations rippled through the architectural world. His dome wasn't just a local celebrity, it was an international sensation. Architects across Europe were like kids in a candy store, eager to try out his double-shell structure, herringbone brick pattern, and linear perspective in their own projects. The Milan Cathedral and St. Peter's Basilica in Rome both bear the fingerprints of his genius, as architects borrowed liberally from his playbook. But here's the kicker. While Brunelleschi was a trailblazer, his methods weren't universally loved. Some contemporaries saw his avant-garde approaches as reckless, bordering on hubris. After all, he was proposing solutions that defied the conventional wisdom of the time. Trusting a man who kept his cards so close to his vest, with the city's pride and florins on the line, required a leap of faith that not everyone was willing to take. Yet, despite the skeptics, Brunelleschi's legacy endured. He not only changed the skyline of Florence, but also the trajectory of Western architecture. His work laid the foundations, pun intended, for what we now consider the hallmark of Renaissance architecture. The harmonious blend of form and function, beauty and practicality. His innovations didn't just inspire awe, they set a new standard for what architecture could achieve. But let's not wrap this up with a tidy bow and call it a day. Brunelleschi's story is a reminder that genius is often messy and that progress is seldom a straight line. He was a man of contradictions, a visionary who was fiercely guarded, a genius who was also deeply flawed. His legacy is both a testament to human ingenuity and a cautionary tale about the capricious nature of fame and fortune. In the end, Filippo Brunelleschi left us with more than just a magnificent dome. He left us with a legacy of ambition and innovation, a story that resonates through the ages as a reminder of what can be achieved when courage meets creativity. His life was a masterclass in daring to dream, daring to build, and daring to defy the odds. So, next time you gaze up at the Florence Cathedral, remember not just the bricks and the beauty, but also the man behind the masterpiece. A man who understood that sometimes the only way to build a legacy is to crack a few eggs along the way.